Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 907 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And right now, Ukraine is plowing through Kursk, and also it is Fundraiser night. And it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine, and also the news of the ongoing offensive inside of the Russian Federation, as we have gotten major news today that Ukrainian forces are continuing a steady advance towards the area of Lgov and also around the area of Kromsky-Biki today. Also taking a large amount of prisoners and capturing a great deal of Russian vehicles as well, and some of those we've been able to narrow down a little bit as being vehicles captured from the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, once again showing that that force appears to have been broken on the front line and has now abandoned its positions, leaving behind some very interesting vehicles. Not anything wild or extremely rare, but at least an interesting number of them. We have also been able to see that while the battle for Kursk continues on in full form, we're also starting to hear that from behind the lines, the Ukrainians are starting to try and ensure that normal life continues on for the Russians that pretty much got enveloped by the Ukrainian offensive and are living within occupied Ukrainian territory at this moment. It's very interesting to see that. We're going to be showing a little bit of that today on video and picture evidence, but we also were able to get more video footage confirming the destruction of the bridge at Zovano, the only other bridge that was actually usable in any kind of a way, shape, or form for the Russian forces south of the Reka Seym. And we also got to see that apparently the Akhmat showed up in Klitschko today, but not to try and defend or help the Russians evacuate the area south of Reka Seym. They were there to rob the place. We'll be showing that here in a little bit as well. But we also got some really interesting news that the Ukrainians conducted a large drone attack on an oil depot near the area of Rostov-on-Don once more, trying to pretty much conduct a war or wage a war on Russia's usable fuel resources and try and run them dry before the end of this year, which seems as though it may still be on track that will happen. Not only that, we got a little bit of news from the front lines as well, in between the areas of the Korean forest and also around the area of Pokrovsk as well, once again showing us that the Ukrainians are trying to inflict as high of casualties as possible onto the Russian forces invading these areas, but still in the Pokrovsk direction, things have been a little difficult. But nevertheless, we have loads of news tonight, and these are just some of the larger bulletin points that we can put out for news here on this channel. We still have loads of stuff to cover tonight, but before we get on into that, I do have to make a quick announcement that we are running a Sunday night fundraiser. Of course, a channel tradition. Every single Sunday, we run a fundraiser for a nonprofit that is operating in some way, shape, or form in Ukraine and helping out, and this one is Nova Ukraine, an amazing nonprofit, and we've already raised about $1,900 in support of Nova Ukraine. We have a goal of $3,000, so we're almost all the way there, and the stream just started. Pretty wild to see.
That is crazy, man. That is almost a record right there. We're almost at 2,000, like 1,000 to go, man. That's crazy.
Man, it is absolutely crazy. And speaking of about 1,000 to go, the Ukrainians have about less than 1,000 square kilometers of ground that separates them from controlling the entire area of the Reka Seym and the small Russian garrison that is here defending this area at this moment. We were able to get more major news today as video footage began to surface showing that the bridge at Zivano has been completely destroyed by Ukrainian airstrikes over the past few hours. We were able to get the footage today of the already largely damaged bridge being hit again, and we can see this clip right here. We see the airstrike hitting right there on the very end of the bridge, causing the serious damage that we have seen over a little while now. And now we can see that the entire bridge span, from what we can tell, at least here in this video footage, appears to be under the water in this area. Well, correction, actually,
I guess you can call this the troubled bridge over calm waters.
Apparently, that's actually a pretty good one. But we can see that the sides of the bridge still exist, but the central area that was actually used for vehicle travel appears to be gone now. We also have a backup clip of this as well, just in case if that one disappeared to some place somewhere. We do have this clip, which once again shows the damage just in another video, but still, from what we can understand, all bridges that could be used by the Ukrainians, well, actually by the Russians, to retreat across the Reka Seym are gone at this moment. A very big development within this area, because yesterday we were able to confirm largely that the bridge had been knocked out for vehicle traffic. Now today it appears that it's knocked out for any kind of traffic. Even foot traffic in this area would be next to impossible because of the serious damage to the bridge. Also, one other thing that I have to point out, because I'm sure many keen-eyed people who are going to try and say something about our analysis here are going to say that there is a small bridge at the village of Kurish that also crosses the Reka Seym. From what we understand, this bridge doesn't actually connect to anything further north inside of the area around Rilisk, or really the Rilisk district or area of the Kursk Oblast. This bridge only serves as a connection to the small villages that are just north of the Reka Seym along this area, so it does not really serve that much of a strategic purpose for the Russians or the Ukrainians, and so for that reason, we do not count this bridge in our battle analysis. That's also why we've seen that the Ukrainians aren't really knocking it out or trying to hit it, because also to them as well, it doesn't really pose any kind of strategic significance at this point, or really at any point later on in the future. Nevertheless, though, we are able to confirm now that the Glishkovo bridge and the bridge at Zivano have been destroyed. And so we're going to be turning this marker red right here to confirm that that bridge is also knocked out along with the one at Glishkovo. And this leaves only the small pontoon bridge near Kubliki for the entirety of the Russian armed forces to try and resupply south of the Reka Seym, and not only that, to try and pull in reinforcements, although their abilities will be fairly limited. From what we understand...
And also, by the way, I see here someone in the live chat by the name of Valery Gerasimov, very interesting name. They said, I see on Telegram that they just got the last bridge, and the Russian telegrams are reporting that. So I haven't confirmed that, and I haven't seen it on Twitter yet, but we're getting some unconfirmed rumors here in the chat that the last one might actually be taken out.
Interesting. I'm not sure if he's saying the last one is in Zevano, which is what we're counting as the last bridge, or Kurish, which is the other last bridge if you want to count it, although it really has no value. But we will be trying to look around for that news on in the future. But nevertheless, this does leave the Russians with only the pontoon bridge at the moment, just about a mile and a half away from Glishkovo, to try and conduct their resupply and further reinforcements in this area south of Reka Seym. From what we know, this bridge doesn't really have a large tonnage tolerance. It's actually set up right here in this area. This is exactly where the pontoon bridge is. It's set up from this dirt road on the northern end of the river, and then it spreads off to the southern end of the river right down here. But nevertheless, it does seem as though the Russians are not able to move any kind of tanks or larger armored support south of the Reka Seym, meaning that any Russians that are in this area will be light forces at best, and maybe supported by normal cars or something along those lines. Probably Buhankas being the best thing that can cross. And Buhankas did in fact cross, because we got to hear the news that the Akhmat unit has moved in, the strong and powerful Akhmat unit of Ramzan Kadyrov's mountain boys from Chechnya. They have moved into the Glishkovo area, and they are here to save the day. They are going to be liberating the Russians, not from those damnable Ukrainian savages that are advancing on them from the eastern side of the city. Oh, no. They're liberating the Russians of their personal belongings and property, because the Akhmat actually showed up in Glishkovo today only to loot the town. And so here's a security camera from literally just a few days ago, actually it was literally just yesterday, showing the Akhmat guys arrive in the town, loot some of the buildings, and then from what we understand, they went right back across the pontoon bridge and have not been seen since. And so here's the clip. The Russian defense of the Kursk Oblast is going about as well as this guy trying to kick down this door. It's going pretty poorly.
Be careful, comrade. Highly trained.
You know, Matthew, they always say that things that were made in Russia are really shoddy quality, like really, really bad quality, and effort was put into stuff made in Russia. I would have to say that apparently that's not true, because this door is either made of steel or it's blast-proof or something, but this guy is giving it some really strong kicks, and that thing isn't even budging, not even shaking a little bit.
This door must be imported from China. That's a lot of talking to tear down the door.
Yeah, like meanwhile, the Ukrainians are about 8 miles, 7 miles away from the town right now, trying to get there and take it over. And while that's going on, instead of trying to defend the town, they're inside the town trying to steal anything they can. You see that they now found a fire extinguisher. That doesn't really seem to be working either. He's getting angry. broke the fire extinguisher broke before the door did. Like this is how strong this door is.
Oh, he's got backup.
Oh, he's like, my turn.
And what is this, an electronics store or something? Or what kind of store is this? Can we tell?
It's something along that line. It's something like an electronics store. We're not entirely certain, but whatever it is, they are trying to get through that door, man, and they just can't. Like, man, we're talking about Chechnya's strongest soldiers versus Russia's weakest door. Like, this is a fight. This is a battle for the ages. This is even better than the entire war in Ukraine, really, to be honest. And he's still trying to get in there. I mean, they will fight harder to steal than they will against the Ukrainians themselves. It's a wild kind of a phenomenon with the Akhmat troops.
I will give them points for perseverance, though. Like, at this point, they should have given up.
So now they're trying some more. Oh my lord. This guy's now, he doesn't even have any form to this anymore. He's finally given up on the fire extinguisher. Now they're just going to start nabbing some of the electronics that are over here in the wide open that they could have just stolen in the first place. As we hit $3,000 raised on the fundraiser. Absolutely incredible.
Jaga.
Igor! It appears that they've given up on the door for now. Oh, he's going back to it. What has this guy found at the desk? He hasn't really found anything apparently he wants to keep. We now see him climbing out of the window that they broke open to get in. They literally conducted a break and enter to get into the building, and then they couldn't even get through the actual door to what else is inside the building. See them stealing everything they can. He's now climbing back out the window. And the Akhmat has not been seen since in the area of Glishkovo. They only showed up to rob an electronics store and immediately right across the pontoon bridge, back up towards Rilisk, and left the area, leaving the Russian border guard detachment of about 700 men south of the river, still left entirely on their own to defend themselves. This is the kind of thing that is going to get the Russians screwed over in the end in this offensive, is that you have soldiers that are either incredibly low morale, or they're poorly trained and have somewhat okay morale, or you then have the Akhmat, which kills your own guys, scares them so much they'd rather surrender to the Ukrainians than even retreat if they get pushed back. And not only that, they're robbing everyone blind in the area. I mean, this is literally like the Russian government in personified form is the Akhmat unit. But still, nevertheless, time is going to be running out for the Akhmat to be trying to rob the entire area south of the river, because the Ukrainians are still making advances towards Glishkovo today, as the Ukrainians were announced to have arrived and captured the town of Apanasovka just south of Snegosk today. And we were able to hear that as an official announcement. This map is not the same as ours. I'm going to be entirely honest with y'all. Every single map is showing something completely different out there on the internet right now. Some of them show, like ours, that the Ukrainians have captured Korenivo, and we've been able to confirm that with picture and video evidence here. This map does not, but we have been able to confirm that the 501st Battalion has taken the town of Apanasovka, and this is also confirming for us that the 501st Battalion is active in the area. Unfortunately, I don't have the exact info as to what brigade that battalion is attached to at the moment, but still very good to hear that they are continuing to make their gradual advance towards the town of Glishkovo. Right now, from our frontline estimates, Ukrainian forces are approximately 6 miles away from the town of Glishkovo. Not that far. It will be a little bit farther, though, because they do have to move down the roads from Komarovka and then to Kobliki and then to Glishkovo itself. But nevertheless, they are making pretty decent progress, and it does seem as though this area will start to fall under Ukrainian control and probably remain that way indefinitely. In fact, we believe that the western area will probably be the most advantageous area for the Ukrainians, and if the Russians were ever able to group up a large enough offensive force to be able to try and push the Ukrainians out, this area on the western flank around Glishkovo will probably be the last one to fall, because it has a great deal of geographical advantages for the Ukrainians if they were ever to have to set up a defensive position within this front. They've already blown up the bridges. The Russians in this area are very well depleted, and once the Ukrainians do capture this area, the Russians will then be faced with a situation that is wildly difficult. They have to try and conduct a cross-river offensive into this area, which will be very difficult. There are no more long-lasting bridges within the entirety of the Reka Seym. There are really no ways for the Russians to do anything that would be effective as far as an offensive in this area without taking incredibly high losses, speaking in a kind of like a future setting of a sort. But still, with that, we're now going to be moving on and into the area of Korenivo, where we did get to see today that a T-80 of the Russian Federation has been destroyed. This is one of the few T-80s of the Russians that we've ever seen destroyed so far in the entire campaign. And a lot of people would think that I'm saying that the Russians have done really well because of that fact. No, most of these T-80s that we find in the campaign that were on the Russian side are usually intact and completely abandoned, and so the Ukrainians just end up capturing them and then introducing them into their own armed forces. And so, interestingly enough, this is one of the few that we've actually seen destroyed. It is also suggesting that heavier fighting has been occurring around the area of Korenivo, but due to operational security reasons, Ukraine has not published any or much of the footage that came out of the Battle of Korenivo so far. We can see right here the Ukrainians observing it. We can see a road wheel right there of the T-80. We can see that this thing
It's just
burned
a hunk
out.
of scrap, man. Just junk. Also, is that a lucky log on the back of it? Did I see that correctly?
Lucky log. Lucky log. Well, I be dipped, dude. The log, like, survived the fire better than the actual steel tank. Like, isn't that a little bizarre? Like, that literally is just like an unburned, untouched log.
That's a very durable log, a long-lasting log.
Man, we need real long-lasting log. Maybe the Russians need to research producing tanks made entirely out of timbers, because apparently the logs that they have are more fireproof than the actual steel tanks that they have. That's news to me. That's fairly interesting. And there's one of the road wheels. Suspension actually still attached, interestingly enough. When you see the main gun right here, a 125mm main gun. And we can actually see the turret overturned. So it exploded, and instead of going up into space and doing a turret toss, it exploded and the turret literally just did a 180 and flipped upside down and then landed right back on top of the tank. So that's actually really wild. We never see anything like that. We can see the cope cage was crushed under the weight of the turret falling back down on top of the main battle tank. We can see him showing the inside of the turret. We see someone looking into it. We can actually see the breach of the 125mm cannon right there inside the turret. And that's the end of that clip, but giving us just a small little look at part of the Battle of Korenivo. Once again, I want to put this out there that the Battle of Korenivo has been going on, and it's been one of the heavier battles that we've seen at the moment, but we don't really get to see a lot of what Korenivo currently looks like, or a lot of the fighting in this area, because Ukrainian forces that are involved in this battle are apparently being tied down to some very, very stringent operational security standards, meaning that not really a lot of video or picture evidence comes out of this battle for us to really see what it's looking like at the moment. We did see yesterday that Korenivo appears to have been heavily damaged in the fighting, and today we did also get to see that some limited Russian armor, some pretty high-end Russian armor, as a matter of fact, was involved in the battle and appears to have been destroyed. But beyond that, we're not really getting a lot of information about the Battle of Korenivo in picture and video evidence that we can largely confirm with great detail. But nevertheless, we have been able to hear something interesting, speaking of the Battle of Korenivo and kind of like the Ukrainian grand plan of a sort. We've been able to hear something very interesting from President Zelensky today about this entire offensive and what its aims and what its objectives really are. And according to Zelensky, he has said that the intent of this offensive is to create some sort of a buffer zone in between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, kind of a no man's land of a sort. The Ukrainian army will be within it, but it will give at least a little bit more insulation to the Ukrainian citizens that are living near the border region of Russia, which have been shelled a decent bit in the past. A lot of people have been throwing this statement around today and saying whether they really believe it or not, or whether this is a true statement, or whether there's probably a little bit of a stretching of the truth there about what the real objective of the Ukrainian offensive is. A lot of people have thrown in different statements about this. And Matthew, it seems as though there are really two major camps right now on what people are thinking about that statement. People are saying there's either a whole other reason or that is the reason. And so, Matthew, what are people saying about it, and what are you thinking about it?
So it looks like about 42% of the audience said, yes, I believe Zelensky, and I believe that the real reason of the invasion of Russia is to create a buffer zone for the Ukrainians, while 36% said, no, there's probably another reason, and 11% said, I need more info on this. And honestly, I'd have to be with the 37%. I think there is another reason for it. Honestly, I still will go for the land-for-land exchange theory. I personally think that's the real reason they're invading. But Zelensky seems to be putting forth this idea that they're trying to create a buffer zone. It's possible, but honestly, I don't think that's the primary objective. I think it'll sort of be like an unintentional side effect of trying to get this land-for-land exchange, but I don't think that's the primary reason. So I'd actually have to be with the 36%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, I'm not really believing that all too much either. This offensive is so large and it's spanning such a wide area currently inside of Kursk. There has to be more of a reason to this than creating a buffer zone. Not only that, whenever we see that the Ukrainians have a chance to advance deeper into Kursk, they're taking that chance. If it was a buffer zone, they would probably go about 10 miles deep and then they would stop. And right now, from the deepest, the Ukrainians are about 18 to 19 miles deep. This is far deeper than any kind of what you could call a perimeter or some kind of a security zone, if you wanted to call it that. This is an incredibly deep offensive into the Russian Federation. At the exact same time, just to give you a little bit of an idea, the Russians also said that they were trying to create a buffer zone in between them and Ukraine in the Belgorod area with the Vovchansk offensive, but this is not a buffer zone at all. This is only about 3, maybe 5 miles deep at the best. It's not really that big, and on top of that, it didn't really secure a lot either. And so, going off of this, in my honest opinion, I would have to say that there is certainly some other kind of an objective or reason for why this offensive was conducted. Why in the world would Ukraine want a border or a buffer zone in between them and Russia anyways? Because the reality is that isn't really what this is achieving at all. This is really achieving a decent amount of Ukrainian time and manpower, effort, and armament is being diverted into the Russian Federation, and as a result of that, the Russians are having to pull a lot of their forces out of Ukraine and then divert them into Kursk, out of the war for the large part, to fight against these Ukrainians. So that doesn't really seem to be creating a buffer zone. It seems to be creating a new front, and not only that, pulling Russian forces out of Ukraine. So I'm fairly certain that Zelensky's statement there is trying to make it sound like there's another reason for this offensive, but in my honest opinion, I believe that this was entirely to draw the Russians out of Ukraine and divert a large amount of their forces back into Russia, and also to try and gain a decent amount of territory for a possible land-for-land trade on in the future. That would at least be
Do you think that maybe Zelensky's mocking Putin since they said that they were going into Ukraine to invade their territory to get a buffer zone? Do you think that maybe Zelensky's mocking Putin by saying they're doing the same thing in Russian territory?
It could possibly be. Like, it could entirely be something that's...
Seems like it.
Yeah, mocking them, because it doesn't really make all too much sense when you look at it from a logical perspective. This isn't really doing anything as far as a buffer zone. It's more so doing something as diverting Russian troops into this area and also threatening the Russians with a grave situation where they may end up losing a decent amount of territory and ending up having to trade land for land. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Also, another thing I want to show y'all here, and this is something very important. If you look at the area right here of the Ukrainian front line, and I wonder, edit style, Add image or video, delete the place. Damn, I can't. I hate that because I was wanting to see if I could copy and paste this further down here to show you all the difference in between the Vovchansk offensive and the one in Kursk. And I think the best way I can do that is show y'all right here. This is what the Russians claimed was creating a buffer zone right down there around Vovchansk. This is what the Ukrainians are claiming as a buffer zone. There's a very big difference in between the two, and it's leading me to believe this is not a buffer zone. This is a major offensive meant to gain a large amount of ground and then try and trade that later with the Russians. I guess it just sounds, maybe in the Ukrainian government's mind, a little bit better to say something like, oh, you know, we're just trying to create a buffer zone. Because then it sounds like a bit more of a benign humanitarian kind of a thing for the Ukrainians than saying we're trying to take over their land so that way we can trade it for our land in the future. I guess they maybe decided that didn't sound too good. I don't know why. I mean, it sounds like a pretty viable kind of an idea to me. I don't know why in the world anyone would be ashamed of saying something like that if that's the truth. But it is what it is for the large part, and that's what I would believe at the moment with what we're seeing. But we also got to see some interesting stuff on the Sumy side of the border today, where we got to see an Su-24 conducting a air support mission and firing at Russian targets. When you see the Su-24 pull up, fire off a some kind of weapons. It looks like some kind of air-guided bombs or missiles. I'm not entirely sure. But we see the Su-24 hitting the deck and getting the hell out of there, which is pretty interesting to see. Sadly, we don't know what kind of weapon was launched from that Su-24, but still interesting to see one conducting an air operation around the Kursk Oblast at this moment. We also got to see a Martyr 1 A3 entering the Kursk Oblast as well today from Sumy. These are pretty cool little APCs. We don't get to talk about them a lot. They have been present in the offensive for a good while now, really ever since day one. These are what could be called more so of an armored personnel carrier than an infantry fighting vehicle, although it's kind of the midway point in between the two. But let me show you all the Martyr really quickly, because these things are pretty neat. These are an older German armored personnel carrier. They're currently being phased out and replaced. I believe they've actually been completely phased out, and the Germans are replacing them right now with the Puma, which is a more modern infantry fighting vehicle, kind of a armor support vehicle. This one is pretty cool, though. It has a 20mm autocannon. Also, some variants, well, really all variants, if you have the equipment, can be mounted with a Milan 2 ATGM, which ends up creating a Bradley-ish kind of a vehicle. It doesn't have the kind of armor of a Bradley or really the abilities of the Bradley as an infantry fighting vehicle, but as an armored personnel carrier, it's getting really close. It has the autocannon to support the infantry and lay down suppressive fire, and it also has the Milan ATGM, if it's mounted with one, to be able to conduct some anti-armor operations in a very limited capacity as well. And not only that, carry infantry on and off the battlefield as well, kind of as a shuttle. This one does not have the Milan. You can actually see where the mount for the Milan would be, but it does not have it. And so it only has the 20mm autocannon. So this one really does fall along the lines of an armored personnel carrier, more so than the APC IFV kind of a hybrid that you get when you attach the ATGM to it. But still, a pretty interesting vehicle. The Ukrainians have gotten these in fairly large numbers from what we understand, and they have been pretty numerous, not only in the southern front near Robotny, but also within the Kursk Offensive as well. I gotta say, NATO Tricolor Sark looks great. Sadly, this one looks a little more worn out, but this is sublime looking, at least to me aesthetically. But moving,
it looks pretty cool. It looks like that nice, kind of like woodland camo. It's good. It's not my favorite, but it looks pretty traditional, so I like it.
It doesn't look that bad. It's not bad. It's pretty good. But moving on from that, and on into the Kursk Oblast again, we're now going to be moving up a little bit towards Kromsky-Byky, where we did get to see that the Ukrainians took on more Russian prisoners of war. This footage was taken by the Korn Group. The Korn Group appears to be taking a lot of footage, really from the entirety of all offensive directions, and so here's the clip.
Представляйся.
Мне, да? Горшков Александр Александрович.
Следующий.
Яфеев Владислав Владимирович. Коткин Дмитрий Анатольевич.
Служили где?
В 200-й Печенской бригаде.
That guy's pretty damn old to be fighting. Oh, well, that guy looks like he fell down in a thorn bush or something over there in the middle.
Man, maybe he fell down on a corn bush.
Oh, I see what you did there.
Поздравляем вас. Вы останетесь живыми. Вас даже помоют и будут вкусно кормить. Ну, относительно вкусно.
Also, I noticed that the Ukrainians have gone back to using just raw duct tape, so the eyebrows are missing again.
Man, everyone comes out of this little prisoner exchange thing looking like they have shaved eyebrows, and boy, does that look rough. But beyond that, nice to see that they did take more prisoners. And moving on from that and into some really big news today, because yesterday y'all may have realized that the Ukrainians, we located their position somewhere around Pravda, or really south of Cherkasko Porechno, right here. The Ukrainians have been able to be confirmed taking the town of Rusko Porechno, meaning that they have moved a decent bit further north, and they're beginning to close the area that we have been calling the Volonsk Gap for the large part, or really the Volonsk bulge for the most part that juts southwards towards Sudzha. From what we can understand, the Ukrainians are starting to make a decent amount of leeway, getting a large amount of territory surrounding Sudzha at the moment. Of course, this map is also showing something completely different than the other map we showed earlier in stream over near Glashkovo, and it's also showing something completely different from our map. But we were able to corroborate today the Ukrainian forces did take the town, and it is showing that the Ukrainians are starting to capture a much larger amount of territory, at least in sheer volume. I wish that I could redraw these front lines and give y'all an exact square mile and square kilometer count at the moment as to how much territory is actually controlled by the Ukrainians, but it is a considerable amount. We are assuming that it is at this point much greater than 1,000 square kilometers. It's probably somewhere around 13 or 1,400 square kilometers at this point. And if we're counting the uncaptured ground south of the Reka Seym, which will eventually end up being captured, the Ukrainians are in control of over more than 2,000 square kilometers of ground at this moment, or at least exerting a large amount of influence and control over those areas. Moving on from that and towards the area of Kasachia Luknaya, just north of Sudzha, we did get to see that unfortunately the Russians did get a little bit of a lucky break today and ended up hitting what we can understand to be a wounded T-64BV that was being loaded onto a Ukrainian carrier and then moved back across the border. From what we know, the C-64 was damaged at some point and either had some sort of an engine failure or a mobility failure, and so the Ukrainians brought in a transport to pick it up and then take it out of the Kursk Oblast back into Sumy so that way it could be repaired and then brought back into the offensive at some later date. Apparently, it seems as though the Russians did find this T-64BV as it was loaded onto the carrier, and it looks as though they tried to strike it and knock it out. And we see here in this next clip, they're once again watching this Ukrainian carrier with the T-64 on the back. It's hit by the Lancet. It appears that it was a pretty solid hit onto the top of the T-64, and we can see a small fire beginning to burn, usually a death sentence for these kinds of MBTs. But that's the end of the clip. They didn't show it burning all the way down, which is a very interesting thing to note. It may be that the fire was extinguished not that much longer after, or it may have been that the vehicle and carrier burned entirely down to the ground. We are assuming that it may be chalked up as a loss, this T-64BV, because it apparently was already suffering mechanical issues to be loaded up onto a transport like that to be moved out, so they may end up just qualifying that vehicle as a loss. We're not entirely sure yet, but it does appear to have been damaged and now severely damaged, and so we're going to be waiting to see what kind of additional information we can get about that tank if we ever get any. But moving on from that and down into the area of the Lyubomovka direction, we did also get to see that the 82nd Air Mobile Brigade did end up capturing some Russian trophies today, and from what we understand, from the Russian 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, or something along those lines from what we can understand. We can see right here the Ukrainians holding up the flag of the 82nd Brigade, and also with a captured Russian Ural 4320 that looks fairly new. We also got to see that they captured a decent amount of Russian prisoners as well. You can see those pictured here. Very interesting to note, but still nice to see they were able to capture.
Those are the naval infantry people back there, the ones they've captured. Like these are the supposed like really hardcore guys.
Yeah, these are supposedly Russia's elite Black Sea Fleet naval infantry guys.
Wow, they don't look so tough to me, to be honest with you. I know they're captured, but they look kind of honestly, they look like just civilians. Really, they don't even look like fighters.
Man, look at that boiler. Like, goodness.
Like, look at that civilian.
Man, look at this guy. He's got like a mohawk and everything over here. And let's see here. Look at this guy. He looks like Dr. House right here in the middle. He looks like he's about to go pop me a Vicodin or something like that. It's like, who the hell is he? Like, I don't know. These guys are in pretty rough shape, but still, it is good to know that the 82nd Air Mobile is starting to kind of mop up. But also something else that's a little interesting here is that this flag isn't necessarily of, like, apparently this is the Russian unit's flag that they had, because this says something along the lines of Russian or rocket artillery. It says, Raketny Войска и Artillery Russia. So this is something of some kind of an artillery unit that was attached to the 810th Brigade, and this is the really interesting part, because once again, we're trying to fill in the blanks here, and there are a lot of blanks that we have to fill in every day to make this news possible sometimes, because we only get video and picture evidence to corroborate some parts of the story, and we have to fill in some parts as we go. There are two running stories as to how this unit ended up getting captured, which is apparently attached to the 810th. Either, in the confusion, this artillery unit ended up moving up so close to the lines, it got overrun by the 82nd, and then they ended up surrendering because they're an artillery unit and not an actual frontline combat unit, or the 810th broke, and the Ukrainians took advantage and advanced so deep into that break point in the line that they were able to get into pretty much the third line of defense, which would be where the artillery was sitting at that time, and they ended up overrunning them and forcing them to surrender. Either of those stories are likely at this point. We don't know which one it would most likely be. To be honest with y'all, I'm probably leaning more towards the story that this unit had poor communication and moved so close to the lines that are currently existing that they ended up being engaged and overrun by the 82nd, more so than the one where the line broke and then the Ukrainians advanced so rapidly they were able to make it far enough behind the lines that they ended up capturing an artillery unit. Because artillery units like these usually are at minimum about 10 miles away from the active front line, meaning that after the 810th broke yesterday, we would have to be assuming, based off of that second story, that the 82nd, as well as the other battalions and brigades involved, rapidly advanced 10 miles forward, which we have not seen or confirmed so far, and ended up capturing this Russian artillery unit. So I'm sure y'all can see why I'm really going with the first story, that they got really close to the front lines and they got captured that way, instead of the second one where it was some kind of a major breakthrough and they advanced 10 miles. Because we don't have any confirmation of that happening anywhere at this point on any front inside the Kursk Offensive. But moving on from that, and out of that little area right there, it's now time for us to move on down to Sudzha itself, as James Hughes and John Kustra throw in about $300 combined. Good Lord.
Let's go. I'm telling you what, $4,000 raised, man. That's crazy. Like, I say this every time. I think this might have been a record because I think it was like, what, 12 or 14 minutes in? We hit $3,000 raised, which is the goal. That seems like a record.
I mean, it is a record at this point nowadays. This is absolutely crazy to see. And it's cool to know that we actually hit 4K in like 50 minutes. Really 40 minutes of being live on air. But that is incredibly cool.
Yeah.
But moving,
the audience got caught in 4K.
4K Ultra HD, man. But moving on from that, in south of Martinovka, we did get to see some Ukrainian vehicles that have been involved in the offensive so far. This as a T-72 AMT. From what I understand, this is one of the foreign-provided T-72s, either from the Czech Republic or some other country along those lines. But I really do like the camo wrap they have on this thing. It looks really good. Moving on from that and into our next picture, we also got to see a captured T-80 BVM. We actually showed this one yesterday, and it does have the Vovchansk offensive markings painted onto the side, showing that this unit was rapidly relocated from the Vovchansk area and up into Kursk, probably at the very beginning of the invasion by Ukraine. Moving on from that, we also got to see a T-72EA. If I am correct, this is the Slovakian version of the T-72 that has been provided to Ukraine. This one is incredibly cool, and let me go see if I can get y'all a better picture of the T-72EA. And so let me see here. Let me see if I can find y'all a really good picture. A great picture. Dagnabbit, apparently I'm thinking of a slightly different one, because there is a variant of the T-72 out there that not only has the main gun, but they ended up cannibalizing some BMP-2s and their 30mm autocannons and mounting them in the top right of the turret, right above the commander's cupola. So not only do they have the 125mm main gun, they also have pretty much an attached armored personnel carrier and its autocannon on that variant of the T-72, but that's not this one. Still, a really cool looking one. Need to know that these kinds of tanks are involved in the offensive. Of course, once again, from what we're seeing based off of the variants beyond this BVM, this one is a Western provided provided T-72 from a former Warsaw Pact country. This one is as well. So once again, while these are Soviet designs, a larger amount of Western equipment is involved in this offensive, even in the heavy armor category. We also got to see someone working on a T-72M1, welding on it. Cover your eyes, folks. Don't get blinded by that, please. But moving on from that, we also we also got to see the captured T-72BA from a while ago. We did show this on stream as well. We also got to see a T-72B3, of course, Russian, captured with the triangles rapidly spray painted on to make sure that everyone knows it's Ukrainian, towing a damaged Ukrainian T-64B1V, or a T-64BV for the large part. We can also see right here a T-72AB. Once again, from what we understand, this was provided by a Western country to Ukraine at some point before the offensive, so technically it's a Western-provided tank, although of Soviet design. We can also see a decent amount of other vehicles back there, some civilian vehicles, a couple of other supply trucks. Pretty interesting to see. We also got to see this really good picture of a T-72B/BV with the guy riding the trike behind it, or whatever the hell that is. We also got to see this picture, which we've also used as a thumbnail as well, of a T-64BV involved in the offensive with the convertible cope cage, which is actually a pretty cool modification. We also got to see the T-90M that was captured. We've shown that one before. The Vetra MRAPs, we've also shown those before as well, along with the Striker, along with this Vicent M1MC, which we haven't seen this picture before, but once again, it's based on the Leopard 1. It's a recovery and engineering vehicle. Pretty interesting to see one of them again. We also got to see this Vicen one with the massive cope cage on it. We've shown that one before. But we also got to see this BMP-1TS. We actually have not seen a lot of these, really at all, at any point in the war. So this is actually pretty cool to note. It has a 30mm main gun, a lot like the BTR-4, but this one also has additional mounts. You can see them here on the sides, although they're not loaded at the moment, for 4 individual ATGM tubes, meaning that this thing really is more so of an IFV than it is an APC because of its anti-tank abilities. But still, pretty cool to see this thing. They are incredibly rare. From what we know, Ukraine has maybe 30 of them, so there's not a lot of these things around. We also got to see these M113s, the American classic. You just can't diss on an M113. I also like that they finally got the proper machine gun shields for them, or the machine gun shrouds, because usually we don't see those. Usually the 50 cal is just mounted on top, kind of naked, where the crew member has to stand up in the open and possibly get shot by anyone, anywhere while running the machine gun. So nice to see that they finally have some machine gun shrouds for them on the M113s. And finally,
looks pretty classy, man. Looks like they're almost in NATO already, based on the equipment they're using. Also, I seriously wonder, I wonder how Russia really feels about this. Not that we care, but I'm sure that Putin's seeing all this Western equipment rolling into their country, and they're probably thinking, huh, that's weird. That's a abnormally amount of NATO equipment coming in here. It seems to be a lot of the equipment being used in the invasion is actually U.S. equipment. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's really a lot of U.S., really just NATO equipment as a whole that's being used. It's almost a big slap in the face, at least materially, because almost nothing, a very, very small amount of what we've seen so far is actually full-blooded Ukrainian equipment from Soviet times or from modern Ukrainian times. We don't really see that a lot. Also, another thing that I want to point out about these M113s is that this one is actually mounted with smoke grenade launchers, which is something that most M113s, at least the earlier variants, never had. So it is kind of cool to see that they have a way to try and conceal their M113 if it ever got in a tough spot. They can actually fire off some smoke grenades to help out with that kind of an issue. Then finally, we got to see a Mancat transport in the background. Those were provided by Germany, and some of y'all are like, Mancat? Yeah, the company is called Man, but the actual name of the truck is a cat, a K-A-T, so we call it a Mancat. So like a werewolf. Well, werewolf is like a dog, but y'all get the picture. It's some kind of a weird truck. And we also got to see this VAB.
A werewolf is a dog, man. That's a wolf. It's in the name.
Man, I don't know, man. It's kind of doggish to me, man. It got that dog in him, you know what I mean? But beyond that, we also got to see this little VAB right here scooting around, provided by France. But still, really neat to see all of these vehicles out there. A lot of Western vehicles, once again, as we can note. And hopefully, they're doing incredibly well out there on the battlefield. But we don't get that much information on the exact actions of these vehicles. We probably will at a later date. But moving on from that and into Sudzha, we also got to see that the Ukrainians went in and did everyone in the area a favor. They went into the Russian draft office, a part of the Russian local commissariat, and they started to burn the draft papers, making sure that when the Russians return, if they ever do into this area, they will not have the proper data and information filed on all of these citizens to be able to start mobilizing them and conscripting them rapidly if they needed to. And so here's the clip.
110 ОР, находящиеся в розыске вследствие уклонения от мероприятий, связанных с исполнением воинської обязанності. Звичайно, ми не дозволимо потім російському військкомату отримувати всю цю інформацію. Допоможемо громадянам, які не хочуть воювати і вмирати за Путіна, які не дають Путіну себе вбити. Допоможемо тим росіянам, які свідомі. Так що ці справи будуть особисті, нами знищені.
Yes, the good old practice of burning documents.
Ah, yes. I see you know your Russian well. Good one. Oh, they got that.
Oh, they got dramatic music over it too.
Man.
It's like inspirational, man. They're destroying the documents and records. It is a glorious day.
Man, they said, we're freeing them. Like, they set it on fire. The dramatic music starts playing. But for a lot of these people, it probably will be dramatic because they're probably not ever going to get conscripted at this point, even if the Russians retook the area. But moving on from that and into the next little clip that we also got to see some photos of the Ukrainian Special Forces once again in the area. We can see them posing on a car in front of a Russian restaurant inside the town of Sudzha. I don't know why they put like an old-ass filter on this thing that makes it look like it's from like the 90s or the early 2000s, but for some reason they did. Doesn't really look that bad. Pick goes hard. Feel free to screenshot. We also...
Man, goes so hard.
Man, we also got to see a little bit of a talk with the Russian locals that a Ukrainian soldier had. I'm not going to be talking over it. I'm just going to let the clip play. So without further ado, here it is.
Україні. Героям слава, треба відповідати. Ви місцеві всі мешканці? Не понимаете язык наш еще? Еще не понимаете? Я понял. Ми вас чудово розуміємо. Що, у вас все нормально? Все хватає? Ніхто не обіжає? Що? Я не знаю, хто такий Віталік. Ніхто не обіжає, все достатньо вам. Да? Як, ви раді українців бачите чи ні?
Ну, пока ви...
Саме головне, зрівняти з тим, як ваші військові зайшли в Бучу і Ірпінь, я вам хочу сказати, то саме головне пити, їсти, є все, да? Вообще хорошо, да? Ні, питань нема, дивіться, перед вами без зброї стою, щоб, а то там роздувають, що ми вас тут катуємо в Судже, понімаєте? Ні, оце ваші новини преподносять, преподносять, що ми вас тут вбиваємо.
Ни телефонов, ничего мы не знаем.
Вакууме, да?
Это вы нам только говорите, а мы не знаем.
Командир, прекрасно в войне знаешь, пропаганда,
Все.
нагнетание.
Спасибо
Правильно?
вам, спасибо, да.
Да. А так в этом отношении обеспечили, молодцы.
Все, благодарю вас.
Да.
Все, берегите себя, удачи вам.
Да.
Удачи.
And then the Ukrainian soldier walked away from the paid actors that the evil people of George Soros paid to say the Ukrainians were treating them well. I be damned. This has got to stop. Like, I think we need to stop giving money to them damn Ukrainians or whatever the hell. You know what I'm talking about, Matthew. You know what I'm talking about. But it is
Yes,
nice.
I do, man. It's the Russian brain rot. I'm telling you what, those pro-Russians that praise the Putin regime like it's like they're a father or something like that.
Yeah, but still, it is nice to see that the Ukrainians are wandering around inside the town, unarmed apparently, and it does seem as though the locals are on a fairly decent accord with the Ukrainians that are occupying the town at the moment. So it seems that, as we can understand, the Ukrainians are doing quite well in the occupied areas in regards to dealing with the citizenry, and it doesn't look as though any kind of mistreatment's happening, at least from video footage that we can confirm at the moment. You know, of course, there may be some mistreatment going on in the background. To be honest, I would actually generally expect some mistreatment because it always happens. Like, you know, you always will have bad eggs doing something very questionable somewhere out there, so it's probably happening, but thank the Lord it's not the norm, like with the Russians, where it's largely encouraged instead of looked at with disdain and usually punished. And a lot of people are going to be saying, wait a minute, you're saying that the Ukrainians might end up mistreating some citizens? Yeah, like, everyone ends up mistreating citizens in war. I mean, hell, American soldiers in the Second World War ended up being court-martialed and hung for some of their offenses that they conducted in France, for the crimes that they were conducting against the common people there. So I would say that it will be an eventuality. Something will happen inside of Kursk that a Ukrainian soldier will probably get tried and convicted for. It just happens. That's usually the case of war. Like, there's bad eggs out there in real life everywhere. There's going to be a couple of bad eggs in the service as well. So we'll probably see them pop up here and there. But once again, the importance in between the two is that unlike the Russians, where it is the norm to mistreat citizens and take pride in it, the Ukrainians seem to be treating them incredibly well, at least the best they can. And so with that, I hope that does address that at least fairly. And moving on from that and down towards the area of Belitsa, we also get to see that more trophy vehicles have been taken today. I'm going to be letting y'all see these as the TikTok music plays. We see that they captured some kind of a KAMAZ.
Down with the KAMAZ.
From the river to the sea, our KAMAZ will be free. Like, something like that. But we can see here the them looking around this Russian dugout, and man, it is a pigsty in there. We can also see a license plate. See this guy popping open an ammo box, and inside,
I thought he was holding a vape for a second. I was like, is that a vape in his hands or something? I guess it's something else.
I suppose so. Perhaps it is something else. We see them looking inside of these packs. I don't really know what's in them. But that's the end of that clip, and nice to see that they were able to capture another bit of Russian equipment in this area. We also got to see a little bit further down that the Ukrainians also captured a gun, an MT-12 Rapira. These things are fairly old, and from what we know, they're largely being used by some older elements of the Russian armed forces that are in this area, maybe the border guards. But once again, we can see another Russian rocket and artillery flag pop up that was captured as well, which is showing that apparently Russian artillery forces are so close to the front lines, not only in the Lyubimova direction, but also in the Belitsa direction, that they're getting captured at a fairly consistent pace. So I just don't know if that's miscommunication or bad coordination on the Russians' end for the artillery to be getting this close that they're getting captured this much, but still starting to notice a reoccurring trend of Russian artillery units getting captured or engaging in frontline action and giving up because they're not built to sustain any kind of frontline fighting like that. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address everything within the Kursk Oblast the best we can. That's all the video and picture evidence that we have today, and we hope that the analysis was enlightening to say the least. And it's now time for us to move on out there to North Korea. Y'all know that North Korea's got to be saying something interesting, because they always have cool, fun stuff to say. And it's something to note that the North Koreans do have a defensive pact with Russia and said that whenever the Ukrainians invade, they would come to their defense. And we've been able to see that the North Koreans came to Russia's aid today publicly. They are stopping this war single-handedly. They came out and said, hey, stop that. And they did nothing. They did nothing. So we can see our boy over here. He just got done eating those 447 goats that were given to North Korea about 3 days ago. It really does show on his face. But we did get to hear that North Korea's foreign ministry condemned Ukraine's military operation in Russia's Kursk region, and it expressed support for Russia as it seeks to defend its sovereignty. And so
that really means a lot when literally the entire country of North Korea is condemned by literally the entire world. It means a whole lot for the Hermit Kingdom to come out and say, oh, we condemn you, Ukraine. You shouldn't do this to Russia. It's like, what happened to them condemning Russia for invading Ukraine? It's like literally meaningless. It's like, this is the worst, like, dictator, like, what is it? Like, I guess, like, sucking up fest you could ever have right here between Kim and Putin.
It really is the worst, I would have to say. Also, Matthew, why in the world does it look like Kim Jong-un isn't just fat, but he got stung by a bee in this picture?
He probably did get stung by a bee. He probably did.
Man, I'm telling you what, jeez, like this is not a very good picture of them at all.
It looks like Kim's about to go.
Dude, it looks like he's about to do like a Scooby Doo laugh. He's about to go or something like that. It's like, I don't know about this picture. This is not a good picture of them, but I don't really think you get good pictures of these people. Also, Putin does look tiny in that chair. Like, is it just me, y'all, or does he actually look small in that chair?
No, he really does look small. And also, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not a watch expert, but I do know a couple of them. I think he's wearing like a very, very expensive watch right there for him to be the man of the people and stuff like that. That looks like an IWC right there, which is pretty pricey. So Putin's out here while his people are starving wearing these fine watches. I'm telling you what, look at that. He's a man of the people.
Man, a man of the people, man. A man of those Armani people. But anyways, moving on from that and out of North Korea, it is time for us to get on into some interesting questions. But, well, not interesting questions, but interesting things that folks have been talking about for a second in the chat about some of the things that have been going on. And I know that right now we're asking you all about Lukashenko saying that Ukraine is trying to provoke Russia to use nukes. We're literally about to get to that here in just a second. So let me read y'all what we heard today about that, and then we'll ask y'all about that. We'll ask y'all about that. And so we got to hear today that Lukashenko, I don't know what it is, because at the beginning of the war, Lukashenko was called Lukashenko, and then I guess one day everyone agreed to bitchify his name and call him Lukashenko, because now they're calling him that, and apparently that's some sort of an insult, from what I've gathered, like from what I can find about that. I don't know how that is. I kind of know how it is, because they switched the name from the masculine form to the feminine form, at least as far as you would speak it in Russian. But beyond that, Lukashenko today said Kyiv may try to provoke Moscow to use nuclear weapons. And the dictator also said that the West could openly enter the war in Ukraine, and NATO troops will enter in straight lines, as opposed to zigzags. But beyond that, it does seem as though he said some very interesting stuff today, and a lot of people have had much to say about this stuff. And so, Matthew, what are people saying about it, and what are you thinking about it as well?
So it looks like 78% of the audience said yes, NATO would enter if Russia used nukes, while 11% said no, NATO would stay out regardless, and 5% said I need more intel on it. And right here, I'd have to say this sounds like more mouth running by Lukashenko, because I really don't see Russia whipping out the nukes anytime soon. Even though their country is being invaded and pretty much overrun at a record pace, I really don't think that Putin's ready to whip out the nukes, because on this one, it does beg the question, would NATO actually jump in there if he used nukes? And the question is, where would he use them? He could use them on his own territory, which would be absolutely asinine if he did that, but that's a possibility. Or he could lob one into Ukraine, perhaps maybe on Kyiv. That would be the worst case scenario. But he does have nukes to lob around. So regardless of where they hit, would NATO get involved? And I would have to say, honestly, I'm going to have to say I'm unsure and undecided, because while it would seem pretty straightforward that NATO would jump in, because we don't want nukes to become a norm and also a normal part of warfare, that would be terrible if that happened. It's really hard to tell, because right now NATO is being pretty de-escalatory in pretty much everything. They're really not going out of their way to really be the world police like in the way that we used to be a couple of years back. So I'm really uncertain. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, this is all just hype talk again. I think Lukashenko, whatever y'all want to call him, he's some kind of like a crazy person at this point, man. He's the person sitting over there going, oh, the petrodollar is going to collapse, that esoteric. Like, he's that guy for the Russians at this point. Because I think he just says anything and everything. Like, the stupid thing that he said today is that NATO will enter in straight lines. It's like, yeah, it's like, they drive down a highway, like that's what happens. It's a war, like how else do you enter, like on a road? Like, you drive in a straight line down the road. You don't, like, I don't know what the point of that statement was. It's like the Belarusians would also enter in straight lines. Like, what is the point of that kind of a stupid statement? So I don't.
Do you think Lukashenko is trying to basically vie for Medvedev's job? Because Medvedev is like Putin's anger translator. It sounds to me like Lukashenko is trying to basically like put in his application for that position at this point.
I mean, maybe. I mean, but at the same time, though, Lukashenko rubs me as someone who is stupid enough that he doesn't have like that calculated weirdness about him like Medvedev has, where he comes off as crazy. Like, because Lukashenko, to me, he comes off the same as Maduro. Because I don't know if y'all heard about this today, but Maduro came out in some, once again, like, state televised address and said something along the lines of like, Elon and like Mike Tyson or some random person was trying to overthrow the Venezuelan government or something like that. Like he comes out, Maduro does, and he goes into these insane illogical rants that don't even sound realistic. They're just fanciful, and people take him as a crazy nut, and he is a crazy nut. That's how I take Lukashenko. It seems to me like he's just a crazy nut. He doesn't really know a lot of what he's talking about. Like him, Maduro, and Ceausescu, they all like fall under the same category to me of like stupidly like idiotic dictators. Like they're all in the same group.
New adjective, stupidly dictatorial at this point. Now, I would say they definitely fall in that category.
Yeah, I mean it's ridiculous, man. Like I don't know if you know this, Matthew. This one's a great one. But in Bucharest, way back in the day, when Ceausescu was in charge and Romania was a communist country, they went and did something that was ridiculously stupid. And let me show you this. This is a river that travels through the middle of Budapest. Now, anyone who has ever worked on metro lines, because Bucharest has a metro line, they know that one of the worst things to do is build the metro down the length of any kind of waterway like this, because it causes flooding and a lot of water and moisture issues later on down the line after the thing's built. So, because Ceausescu was an idiot, and I'm using him as a comparison to Maduro and Lukashenko, because he was an idiot, he let his wife design the entire metro system. And so, what they did, it was so stupid, is that the wife wanted to build the entire metro line down the length of the river underground. So the entire Bucharest metro system on that line has like endless water issues, like it's an endless battle even today. And another thing that she did that really still sticks with the folks, here in Bucharest to this day, is that she absolutely hated the kids going to university here in Bucharest. And for some reason she said, nah, they're lazy and fat, they need to walk. So she refused to build a metro station at the only university in the city. And so what the metro designers actually did is that they secretly built this tiny, tiny little platform on the very side of the track. So that way it didn't look like the tunnel had merged into a train station or anything like that. It was just a kind of like a platform on the side of the track, because later on, it turns out, well, it looks like all the university kids need access to the metro. So then they built this station. I believe it's this one in particular. And let me see if I can find you a picture of this thing underground. I be dipped. Is this the old one? I hope it is. Because if it is, I got this dead on the nail. Because this is not it, I don't think. Because it was narrow as hell. I think they ended up expanding it later. Let me see. Romanian narrow subway platform. Let me see if that'll get it for me. Here we go. Here it is. It's the Piața Romana metro station. So let me see if I can pull that up. The Piața Romana metro station. I hope that I can find this. Okay, so it's actually up here. And so let's see here. Do they have the metro station here? It's got to be here. It's not here. So I'm just going to have to show you all the pictures of it, because apparently they shut it down or something like that at some point. But let me go get you all the picture, because this is the platform. Like, no lie. This is it. Because they had to build it in secret, because the wife of Ceausescu was so stupid she didn't want a platform there. So they built this thing that is literally so wide you can only kind of like shimmy your way up and down it. You can't even walk down the platform because it's that narrow.
I guess the lesson of the day is that the guy was too scared to tell his wife no. So it ended up screwing the entire university kids over. So they have him to thank. But honestly, though, what could they have done differently? Could they have built it on the surface or something?
No, they could have just built the platform wider, like this one. You could have just built it to where people can actually walk around instead of having to build this, because the metro designers couldn't tell Ceausescu or his wife no to anything they wanted to do, so they had to build it in the worst place in Bucharest, along the river going through the middle of the city, and then at this specific metro station, which was attached to the university, the Ceausescu's completely said, no, there's going to be no station built here ever. And so then what the metro designers did, because they knew that that was going to be a disaster and they were going to have to shut down the line in the future anyways and all that to make a station because they were going to eventually have to have one, they ended up creating this very, very narrow platform. So that way the Ceausescu's didn't get pissed off at him and have him killed or arrested later on and put in prison for going against what they said. So that's why this happened. But still, once again, the whole point of the story is to kind of outline stupid dictators and how stupid they really look when you look under the surface at them a good bit. And this is one of those kind of like after effects that lets you know, yeah, Ceausescu was stupid. And I feel like Lukashenko and Maduro are in that same kind of a vein, in my opinion. Apparently, I just want to make sure of this, it is still open, actually. It was opened in 1988. Literally, like, right before Ceausescu ended up getting gunned down when the government fell. It is still in service to this day, apparently. So let's see here. Yeah, it's still open. That's actually wild. I did not know that. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion, at least from what I know. And with that, we are now about to be moving on into the rest of the news that we have in Ukraine. But before we do want to say something about the fundraiser tonight. It has been doing unbelievably well. We have raised nearly $4.4 thousand at this moment while we're live on air.
Damn.
That is an absurdly high amount. And I've got to give a huge thanks to everyone so far tonight, both massive donors and small donors who have all come together to make this fundraiser possible tonight and to have such an incredible impact in Ukraine. Nova Ukraine is an amazing nonprofit that helps out a lot over there, and it's amazing to know that all of y'all continue to support Ukraine through these nonprofits and help Ukraine to be able to focus less on the humanitarian side of things and more on the war fighting side of things, hopefully bringing victory even sooner rather than later. But before we move on into that Ukraine war news, I want to make sure that we give a huge shout out to all of the top donors of tonight's fundraiser. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so calling off our top donors of the night thus far, we have that massive $333 donation from Hal Rose, the largest donation of the night, and a huge shout out to Hal for that massive generosity. Also, a huge shout out to Andy L, who put in a $200 donation, along with Paul Suku, as well as James Hughes. Huge shout out to Paul and James as well for that massive donations. And also, we have a $175 from Tom S, as well as a $150 from Purple Gerbil. And then we have a $131 from some guy called The Enforcer. We know him. And we also have a $100 from Hal Rose, as well as Dixie LaFleur, Old Warrior, Jeff Peppers, Gene Kustra. And then we have a $50 from James Roberts, Gunfox61, Panama Floyd, Dad Good, Thomas Sevenson, as well as Don Edwards, Joyce Morris, Axel K, and Plant Lady. And once again, a huge shout out to everybody that's donated tonight. Not just the top donors, because of course, the massive donations mean a lot to get the number up there really quick, but huge shout out to everybody who's donated tonight, because y'all have gotten us up to $4,334 raised, which is well above goal, and of course, it's all thanks to the LSA. So once again, huge shout out to you all, and another successful fundraiser in the books, thanks to the LSA. And Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta say, a massive shout out and a massive thanks to everyone who has supported this fundraiser tonight, both big and small, both the folks we can call out and the folks we can't call out. I've got to say that we are entirely honored and grateful to know that this channel continues to support Ukraine as massively as it does through these fundraisers. All $4,334 of the support that y'all have thrown into this fundraiser tonight will be going to Nova Ukraine. And it is incredible to know that y'all have done such a thing. I have seen, for some reason tonight, I don't know what it is, Matthew, but it seems to be a brand new kind of a campaign, but probably by the hot dog people, to come in here and say that the fundraiser is a sham. And really quickly, I want to say this really quickly. I want to dispel this again. I feel like we have to do this like every week, but we are as transparent and open as we can be about the monetary side of things with this channel. 100% of the support that is raised through these fundraisers goes directly to the nonprofit that is being fundraised for. This system that we're running this fundraiser off of is baked into the YouTube website itself. This isn't Streamlabs. This isn't Buy Me a Coffee. This isn't where you give us the money and then we give it to Ukraine. You are putting your money directly into a YouTube fundraiser that YouTube is managing, and then they send the money forward from YouTube to that nonprofit. We don't touch any of this money any step of the way. And to confirm that, and I want to make sure that y'all know this to be entirely certain, instead of just taking my word for it, here is my control room right now on stream, and you can see right there, chat revenue does not even show up. There is not even a number there of income that we've made out of the $4,400 that have almost been raised, because these fundraisers we don't make any money off of, and there's no way for us to make any money out of them because of how the YouTube system works. We've been running fundraisers like this forever, and I don't really plan on changing that anytime soon, because I'll be entirely honest with y'all and entirely frank, I find the way that other people do things on YouTube to be very questionable and very concerning on my end, at least as far as the transparency side of things. We are as transparent as possible. That's why we run the fundraisers through YouTube Give, so y'all can actually see the number, and that way y'all know that we're not involved in handling the money at any process in the fundraiser, which adds a lot of safety and security for folks who want to support the fundraiser. But we did see something the other day. Matthew and me saw this, and I found this very interesting. We were wandering around after the stream on the internet talking about how certain kind of people try and push that story about this channel with the fundraisers and stuff. And something that we found interesting is that some of them run merch stores. And we looked at the merch store because many of y'all will know we also run a merch store. And on our merch store, we tell y'all that we donate a percentage of the profits from our sales to United 24. But we actually tell y'all the specific percentage. Per every sale, 10% of our profits will go to United 24. Interestingly enough, we found that the wordage on every single other website that we saw to be completely different in a very important kind of a way. And Matthew, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Instead of telling the consumers, the people who were buying these merchandise products, the exact percentage of their profits that would be going to say supporting Ukraine, they said a portion of the profits will be sent to support Ukraine. It didn't say to where, and it didn't say what percentage. And that is something that is very questionable as far as how that is run. That is very non-transparent and very sketchy. And if people want to make a problem with that, I'm sure someone's about to go running to the hills and tell someone we said that about them. Please do. Because that is very questionable and very sketchy from an outset. If you're going to do something like that, you should tell people the percentage of the profits that are going to be donated and where they're going, instead of just saying a portion of the profits will be given to support Ukraine. It's like, where is that going to support Ukraine, and what portion? Because legally, and I'll share this for all of y'all, legally, considering that they don't actually announce a portion, they can make $100,000 in merchandise sales, and they could give $10 of the profits of that $100,000 to a nonprofit working in Ukraine, and by that definition, they have actually fulfilled their part of that statement, and they have given a portion of the profits to Ukraine. And that's what begs the question with stuff like that. How much of it really is going to support Ukraine and how much of it isn't? That's why we run our fundraisers like this through YouTube instead of doing it any other way. And that's also why when we do things for Ukraine, like with our merch store, and we say that a percentage of our profits are going to Ukraine, we tell you all the specific percentage, and we also say where it's going, and we also post the receipts as well. Except for the last one, because Matthew told me that the merch sales were so low on that he didn't want to put the receipt out, but we do have the receipt for that. We did donate that to United 24. But beyond that, that is what we try and do to be as transparent as we possibly can. But I do want to put that out there for y'all about this thing that we've noticed, because it's always interesting how we get a lot of heat from a lot of people about how what we do is questionable, although we literally fulfill every single obligation and guideline we can to be as transparent as we physically can be with everyone. And then we see that everyone who claims that about us is as non-transparent as they can possibly be, which is something that I would tell y'all to keep a very sharp eye out for. And if y'all ever go to a merch store from any other YouTube channel, make sure to read the fine print at the bottom and see what percentage of the profits are going to be given to support Ukraine and who's it going to be given to. Because if they don't clarify the exact percentage and also who is receiving that money, I would assume that that merchandise website is probably not giving any of the profits to Ukraine at all. It's probably a very small amount, and who knows where it really is going at the end of the day. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Still, a huge shout out and a thanks for everyone who's fundraised so far. We've already reached $4,934. And also, I got to give a huge shout out to LSA Rocks, who threw in a $500 donation.
Wow!
It is the biggest one of the night. A massive shout out to LSA Rocks. Huge thanks to you once again. And also a big shout out to Blackside Videos, who threw in a $60 donation as well. But with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are now going to be moving on into a couple of questions, actually. So, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so it's now time to move on to some questions, and we are looking through the spreadsheet here. Let's see. For some reason, I don't see the Morse code in the spreadsheet tonight. I don't know what happened. I didn't see the Morse code decoders in here. If they were in here, I missed it. So please let me know if I missed it. But anyways, moving on to our first question. This one goes to M. McKernan, who said, do you think that the advance in Kursk slowed down because they are waiting for the logistics to catch up?
I would say it may be. The logistics doesn't really have a lot to catch up on at the moment. The roadways are still intact, and from what we know, there isn't a large amount of damage to really anything inside of the area except for around Korenivo at the moment. So the supply line should be operating fine. I think they're starting to move slowly, maybe because their forces are starting to get stretched a little bit thin for the amount of ground that they're covering, and so now they're trying to make sure to coordinate and advance cautiously just in case if they take an opportunity that really isn't there and then they get counterattacked and a front collapses. I think that's why they're probably starting to move at a little bit of a slower pace. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next question here is going to go to Jack Ray, who says, so do you think that Kursk could also be a learning exercise for liberating Crimea?
I would say probably not really, to be honest. I would say not necessarily. There are really two different pictures that we're seeing, both in southern Zaporizhia, which is where an offensive like that would begin, and also up in the area of Kursk. Zaporizhia is very heavily defended at this point. It is practically a Maginot line on both sides. The Ukrainians have heavily fortified, the Russians have heavily fortified, so there isn't really a lot of ground to be made down there at all from either side at the moment. So an offensive into Kursk, you would have to get through Zaporizhia first, and that would be very difficult at this point. However, in the Kursk offensive, the defenses were very soft. They weren't like hardened defenses or really strong ones, and so the Ukrainians were able to break through and then rapidly advance beyond the breakthrough and capture a large amount of ground. So as far as a strategic or a tactical approach, they're entirely different scenarios for the large part, because the kind of equipment that's needed in both of these offensives is completely different. Like any kind of an offensive down in the Zaporizhia area will require far more artillery support, far more air support, and far more engineering and, really just engineering units than we saw in the Kursk offensive, which means that all of your battle planning in the Zaporizhia front right now would be completely different than what you're seeing inside of the Kursk Oblast. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. And also, I saw someone, Matthew, in the chat asking, so what percentage actually from the merch sales goes? Well, it's 10% of the profits. So if the shirt costs $10 to make and we sell it for $25, it's 10% of $15, because that's the profit that we made off of the shirt. We made $15 in profit. We didn't make $25 because the shirt costs a specific amount and that's deducted. That's why it says 10% of the profits. It would be really hard for us to keep up 10% of I don't even know how in the world that would work, 10% of the sales, because that would start to get really difficult to work when it gets into far larger numbers, because you would eventually see that you would start to take a possible loss, especially if you started to get into bulk numbers, trying to make sure to donate all that to Ukraine. So that's why it's 10% of the profits that we made that word.
Net profits, that is.
Yeah, 10% of net profits. We made that as clear as we could on the website. So it's not 10% of the sale, it's 10% of the profits made off the sale. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, trying to, of course, be as transparent as we can. Interesting question, though, because I feel like, not trying to, be like passive aggressive here. Feel like that was a little bit of a straightforward one. It was 10% of the net profits, well, 10% of the profits, 10% of the net profits, same thing, but still 10% of the profits are sent to the non-profit. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that the best we can. And with that, we were on to the final question of this section, and then we're moving on back into Ukraine itself. And so what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so before we get to our last question of this segment, real quick, I have to say, we reached $5,006, so we are now $2,006 above the goal. Let's go! And also, we have Andy L to thank for that. He threw in a $64 donation, and also huge shout out to Andy once again for taking us over the magic 5,000 number. That is very nice to see, and once again, another $5,000 fundraiser when the goal was only $3,000, so that's crazy to see. But with that, the last question of the segment is going to go to DJ JV. He said, "How are the F-16s doing for Ukraine?"
We really don't know. I hate to say that. We have no clue. We haven't heard any news or any information about the F-16s in operation with Ukraine since they've arrived. Like, we know they're there. There's about 10 of them there. We saw them fly around over Odessa, over western Ukraine, and we've never heard or seen of them since. So we have absolutely no idea how well they're doing or if they're doing anything at all. We have absolutely no clue. So we're going to be trying to find that out as we go, but I'll be honest, information is scarce. I mean, it's wildly scarce. We haven't gotten anything about them since their introduction. So we are assuming that throughout the remainder of the war, information on the F-16s will probably be very rare, and we probably will find out what they did way after the war is over, maybe like a year afterwards, when the Ukrainians feel like it's fine to discuss and disclose that kind of information. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. I hate to give such a letdown kind of an answer, but I don't want to, filibuster with a whole bunch of BS. We really don't know, and I don't think anyone knows at this point. And I don't want to be like one of those YouTubers out there who goes, well, actually, I know everything, and then tell you all everything when we really don't have enough information to talk about that kind of stuff with a lot of confidence or a lot of assuredness that what we're saying is right. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we're now moving on into the actual news that we have from inside of Ukraine. Starting off up in Kyiv, we did get to see that Kyiv was attacked in the morning hours by Russian drones and missiles. We were able to see one of them deploying countermeasures, I believe, or getting shot down, one or the other. We also got to see some remains of an Iskander that was also shot down on the outskirts of Kyiv as well. Here's a video showing some of the debris.
Літає, да? Так, десь тут пацани кажуть, є номер. Це зараз. А, ось номер. Номер Іскандера. Напевно, ту велику частину ми понесемо.
He's kicking it to ensure it is, in fact, an Iskander, and it really is an Iskander. That's the end of that.
And it's indeed dead.
It is dead. We can confirm. Moving on from that, though, and into our location unknowns, we did get to see an operator of the 8th Regiment spot the soldier, Matthew.
Oh, yeah, he's right there in the middle. I see him.
Yeah, he's right there, but you wouldn't spot him off the bat, would you? One.
Oh, no, man, I saw him immediately. I glanced up, and I was like, there he is. He's leaning down, like taking a nice little nap.
A nice little snooze. But still, really nice to see the guy, really cool to look at, really neat. But moving on from that, we also got to see the Russian casualty report as well. And check this out. Oh, great!
Oh, my God! Oh, whoa, Jack! Whoa! Wait, whoa! We only got 2 Bobcats? What's going on, Jack? Oh, man. 10% to the big man. But anyways, it looks like that's crazy, man. Tell us some more.
And I got to say, it is incredibly crazy today. 1,170 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed over the past 24 hours. We've also seen 7 APCs destroyed as well, 79 supply trucks, 7 main battle tanks, 71 artillery pieces, a very high number, 38 drones, 1 MLRS, and 2 Bobcat skid steers. All in all, very interesting to see, and good to know that they were able to knock out such a large number of Russian forces and equipment today over the past 24 hours. Moving on from that, and down into Crimea, we also got to see that a surrendering Russian was dropped not a bomb, but a water bottle. The Ukrainians are kind. And so, here's the clip. There goes the water bottle. It looks more like a Nuka-Cola. But we can see them drop it right on top of him. When you see that he thought he got bombed, but alas, he was given a bomb of a refreshment. A Nuka-Cola Quantum.
That's a Nuka-Cola plus 2 rads. Ooh, what a weather.
What?
That was the song, the Fallout song. It was a really crappy rendition of it, but there you go.
Man,
look at him drinking the Nuka-Cola.
Man, he's drinking it like a video game character too. Look at him.
What the hell?
Dude, he clicks
What is
consume.
the hell?
He clicks consume at Nuka-Cola, and it goes through the animation of drinking it. He just keeps on pressing it.
This guy's a little bit manic.
He is a little manic.
Oh.
And we see him doing some jazz hands there, and now he's getting back on the move.
He's an NPC.
Dude, he's like one of those NPC streamers. He's like, bomber, 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 or whatever the hell they do. Like, but we can see him crawling on along again with Nuka-Cola in hand. See him
Let's
taking...
see, someone in the live just said, that's a bottle of kvass, bruh. Is it? What is that?
Man, they're giving him the refreshment of Ukrainians out here on the field. You now see him continuing to crawl on along. Boy, this guy crawls. Look at him go.
So why'd they give him the Nuka-Cola?
I don't know. I have no idea. I guess they just did it to do it, maybe.
They did it because I wanted to do it.
Years ago, they tried to put me in
Put me in the pen.
And now he's laying out again.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, the Nuka-Cola's getting to him. And that's the end of the clip. But still...
Did you put something in the Nuka-Cola? Are you... Wait a minute, is that... what was going on with him?
Oh, nothing, man, dude. It was nothing. But moving on from that and down towards Soledar, we did get to see a Russian tank getting blown up down here today. Check it out, guys. Look at this. There it is. And oh, it gets hit. The engine bay immediately starts smoking. Oh. Oh, you see the engine spooling up. But they're not moving. Oh, there goes the commander. It looks like the gunner's also squirming around in there as well. The commander's now gotten back in the turret. We can now see him climbing around some more. The driver's still in there, apparently. We see the driver getting out, so it looks like all 3 tank crew members are out of the vehicle. And now the Ukrainians are making sure to finish that thing off.
Also, I saw Vito Lucina say in the live chat, say, that's all good, but another settlement needs your help. Marked it on your pit, boys. I cannot stand those Minuteman missions. Like, so terrible. Like, just repeatedly, over and over. They just give you one after the other. It's like, do they ever end? And they never really do. I've never, like, been able to stop those.
You know, man, I wish there was, like, an alternate ending to Fallout 4 where you didn't have to join any of the factions and you could destroy all of them as the Silver Shroud. I wish there was an option for that.
Man, that Silver Shroud was kind of cringy, I'm not going to lie. Like, I would have to be against that option.
But that's why it's goofy, though. That's why it's funny, man. Just imagine showing up to the Brotherhood of Steel and going, ooh, Silver Shroud, and then just, like, blowing up the airship. Like, that would have been funny. Like, it would have been cringe, sure, but it would have been funny because it was cringe.
Maybe we'll get that in Fallout 5 whenever it comes out.
Now you'll get it in Fallout London. What's up, governor? Bloody hell, governor. But anyways, moving on from that, we also get to see a D-20 got obliterated in this area as well. The Russians, of course, had to film it for proof. This guy is heavy breathing on this thing. He's like... it's like, damn. It's like, calm down, man. Like... Whenever a Russian
breathing like a boll weevil. Look at that boiler.
Look at that boll weevil. I mean, maybe he's the next weevil plague, but dang, look at that boiler. The requirements of the U.S. Weevil Corps have really dropped. There's something like that.
Oh, wow. Putting him down and putting him to work and grilling him on the deck. That's, wow.
Oh, man. I can't stand that crap, man, because I actually have a couple of friends that are friends of one of my friends that's in the Space Force, and they're Marines, and they are the peak of physical fitness. I mean, no joke. I mean, they look like you would think a physically fit Marine would look like. And then you got this guy out there going, wow, look, everyone in the Marines is fat these days. It's like, no, they're not. It's like, come on. It's like, be real. But anyways, moving on from that and out of the area and down towards Orlivka, we also get to see a MiG hitting some Russians with some bombs down in this area. Oh, whoa. Oh, look, it's Call of Duty Ghosts. The Federation has been attacking the border or whatever. But anyways, we can see that they're about to start bombing those Russians. Check this out. There's the target. Now, are they going to be able to hit that target? You know they will. You know it. And so we're going to be waiting for them to hit it. Oh, right on the target. I mean, goodness, that is a winner. Also, someone said Marine and Space Force. No. I have a best friend who's in the Space Force, but one of his friends, which now became my friend because he was his friend, is a Marine. There's actually, I think, 2 or 3 of them in that group. But I talked to him, and you know, like everyone had their cameras on. I don't have a camera on my computer, but everyone else had their cameras on. You could tell these guys were the peak of physical fitness, like no joke. And so I don't really like it when folks who priorly served start dissing on all of them, because it's like, they all aren't like physically unfit and, you know, like mentally incapable like these people keep on trying to paint them out to be. I mean, these people are doing a service just like they did. Why trash on them? But anyways, moving on from that into progress, we also got to see a Russian vehicle exploding in this area as well as a part of a failed assault. Oh, look at that intro. This is one of those AI-made intros right there. But we could see that the Ukrainians are now targeting them Russians. This is actually the 110th Brigade doing this work.
They're putting in that work.
When you see the drone coming in. Oh, you see the Russians moving along. It looks like a couple of Russians were running behind the truck. Oh, Matthew, it looks like we have the return of some traditional, well, some actually new and interesting kind of bots. I think you might see that in the live chat when I'm talking about.
Yes, I'm desperately trying to type out the phrase, please no political or religious discussions, please.
Yeah. Oh,
there.
my Lord. It's just...
For some reason, my keyboard's having a little bit of a delay on it whenever I sit here and type. Also, please, folks, let's don't have this in the chat, please. I'm having to time people out. Please, leave that out of the chat.
Also, I had to get another one because I saw it. I was like, hey, I don't think you saw that one. But anyways... Please don't put that in the chat. It starts fights, and we know that that's a new kind of a trolling to do that, and have that pop in, so that way people will end up getting in fights and bloodshed over that. So please don't. But anyways, moving on from that and out of that area, the Pokrovsk direction is a little difficult at the moment, but still, it's not that bad. But moving on from that and down to the area around Rostov-on-Don, we also got to see a little oil depot fire going on. Whoa, Nelly! Whoa! That thing be smoking.
Damn, they hit 2 big spots on that one. That's tough.
That's the end of that clip, but damn, is it nice to see. We also got to see the depot was continuing to burn well on into the night. They never quelled the flames, and the flames flamed on. Also, no, it wasn't you, Matt, at Adam McLean. No, it wasn't you. No, don't worry, you're good. But we see that fire continuing to roast. And those Russians ain't putting it on anytime soon, I'll tell you that. Oh!
Can I go on my famous spill about the Russian fire department? The Russian fire department is so incompetent, so incompetent. They don't have the proper tools. And whenever the Russian fire department shows up somewhere, instead of pulling out the hoses and the powders and stuff like that, they pull out the paperwork desk because they're so busy trying to file their paperwork. They literally do it right next to the fire with like a mobile desk. They're not even worried with putting the fire out. So just such a shameful fire department. And of course, you know, I was actually roasted by a firefighter here in the U.S. who said, don't make fun of those Russian firefighters. We're a brotherhood of firefighters. It's like, dude, it's like, come on now. It's like the Russians are Russians and we're not. So it's like they're a little bit different. And also, they're incompetent.
Man, I know a lot of firefighters around here in the local area. I have never heard any of them say that about the Russian firefighters, like ever. It's like I don't think any of the local firefighters have a lot of good things at all to say about the Russians, including their firefighters. But anyways. Moving on from that and out of the area of Rostov-on-Don, we are now moving on up into the area of Kyiv, because we did get to see a speech today, once again, by President Volodymyr Zelensky, here on the 907th day of the war. And so, without further ado, here is speech. Bleed.
Give me speech. I want long-lasting speech.
Hello, dear Ukrainians, and we get rid of that. Here's a real speech. Peach!
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці, українки. Коротко про сьогодні. Фронт. Передусім Торецьк та Покровськ. За одну цю добу вже десятки атак, але наші підрозділи, наші бригади роблять все для збереження позицій. Я дякую всім, хто це забезпечує. Є за сьогодні хороші, потрібні нам результати у знищенні російської техніки під Торецьком. І це все більш ніж захист для України. Це зараз основне завдання наших оборонних дій загалом. Знищити якомога більше російського потенціалу війни. І проводити максимум контрударної роботи. Зокрема, це і створення буферної зони на території агресора, наша операція в Курській області. Все, що завдає втрат російській армії, російській державі, їхній оборонці та їхній економіці. Все це допомагає нам не допускати розширення війни та наближати справедливе закінчення цієї агресії. Справедливий мир для України. І я вдячний кожному і кожній, хто б'ється заради нашої держави, хто допомагає обороні, хто працює заради України, заради того, щоб якнайшвидше ми досягли своїх завдань. Особливо я хочу відзначити сьогодні нашу 100-ту окрему механізовану бригаду на Торецькому напрямку. Дякую вам, воїни. Дякую вам за силу. 47-ма та 110-та окремі механізовані бригади – це Покровський напрямок. Ваша стійкість, воїни, має значення для всієї України. Також Курахівський напрямок, наші десантники 79-ки. Дякую. Лиманський напрямок, воїни 66-ї та 67-ї окремих механізованих бригад. Харківщина, 42-га окрема механізована бригада. Дякую. Придніпровський напрямок, наші морські піхотинці. 35-та бригада, молодці. Щойно доповідав головком Сирський і щодо ситуації на сході України, і щодо операції в Курській області, і щодо обмінного фонду, щодо комплектації наших бригад, комплектації наших резервів. Це і снаряди, і зброя по всім напрямкам. Наші хлопці, ви молодці. Але щодо постачання від наших партнерів потрібне пришвидшення. Ми дуже просимо. У війни немає відпусток. Потрібні рішення, потрібна вчасна логістика оголошених пакетів. Особливо я звертаюся зараз до Сполучених Штатів, до Великої Британії, до Франції. Ще одне. Попереду важливі тижні нашої дипломатичної роботи. З різними партнерами – і Європа, і Америка, і Глобальний Південь. Ми вже збільшили і будемо ще збільшувати коло тих, хто підтримує справедливе завершення цієї війни. І дуже важливо, щоб в цю осінь Україна зайшла ще сильнішою, ніж ми були до цього. Слава Україні!
And Herom Slava. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 907 of the war. And with that, that wraps up our news segment, and it moves us on into the next segment of this stream, where we get to talk to each and every single one of y'all. It is an incredibly fun segment. It is a very enjoyable segment. We get to talk about so many fun and interesting things. Literally anything and everything y'all want to talk about. And it is truly a limitless segment. But before we get into that, I do have to thank everyone for raising about $5.4 thousand for Nova Ukraine by around the end of this stream. Like, well, it's not the end of the stream yet. We have a lot to go. We have about a good 40 minutes of fun to go, really, to be entirely honest. But nevertheless, I do have to give a huge shout out and a huge thanks to everyone once again who has supported this fundraiser tonight and is helping out the humanitarian side of things inside of Ukraine. Nova Ukraine is an amazing nonprofit that is doing amazing things inside of Ukraine. And I think that it's absolutely wonderful that the Lee Spring Army was once again able to band together and not only reach the fundraiser goal, but far exceed it. I'm entirely proud of y'all once again. I'm always proud of the Lee Spring Army because it actually stands as a true force of good in the world. And it's one that is very rare and seldom seen out there these days, especially with the kind of active efforts that is taken every single week by the entirety of this channel to continuously fundraise and support nonprofits working in Ukraine. And so a huge thanks to y'all once again for that. And with that, it is time for us to move on into recognizing the remainder of the top donors that we have, Matthew. And so what do we got?
All right, so it's now time for the final question segment of the night on a fantastic fundraiser night. And also, we have one last top donor of the stream to call off. And this one goes to Arlie0001, who put in a $150 donation and brought us up to that $5,382 figure. And huge shout out to Arlie for that support on the fundraiser as well. And with that, we are now moving on. We are moving on from that into our poll. And this one right here says, U.S. officials say they are still hopeful for a Gaza ceasefire deal, as Hamas says, F America. And what are your thoughts? 60% said that the U.S. needs to take a hardline approach, while 19% said the U.S. needs to keep trying diplomacy, and 13% said, I say let this one simmer. And me personally, I'd have to say this, that for the U.S. to be saying that we're still hopeful for diplomacy, peace, and stuff like that, while the enemy is sitting, or actually they're not even showing up to the negotiating table, Hamas won't even show up, and then they're yelling from the sidelines, F you, F you. It's like, maybe it might be about time to walk away and teach them a lesson. That seems like common sense. But why are we so desperate to get peace? We're the ones in the advantage position right now. We have all the firepower. Why are we acting like we need to get peace from these people? We don't need to do that. So if they feel like they want to keep killing innocent civilians, then we can show them if we need to, or at least we should. So I'm with the 60%. I think we need to take a hardline approach and stop this madness that's happening in the Middle East right now and put an end to it. But Enforcer, what say you?
But Matthew, you have to understand that peace is all important. I mean, we must achieve peace at all costs necessary. I mean, if we have to give up the Middle East, that's what we have to do, but peace is the most important thing. Do you not understand?
Man, peace is important. I agree with you, but there's a point where you have to stop, basically beating the doors of diplomacy down when there is no door to even open at this point. At some point, diplomacy becomes actually counterproductive. So not only are we letting these people get away with killing civilians, but now we're giving them more time to rearm and also do things to basically reinforce their power they've already got. And it also gives Iran more time to stall while they develop nuclear weapons. So all we're doing is feeding right into their grand plan here, and it's not doing us any good.
You sound like a sick, mentally depraved warmonger, you bet. I'm just kidding with you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. It's a compliment, actually. But the honest answer, all jokes aside, because I was kidding around about saying peace has to be attained at all costs. Peace is something that sometimes cannot be attained, and this is clearly a situation where peace will not be attainable at any point in the future. The proxies are clearly not vying for peace. Iran is having cold feet about actually dedicating themselves to fighting Israel. But the thing is that if it wasn't for the show of force that we were putting up in the area right now, we would see that they would have already started to go to war with Israel probably weeks ago. That would be the entire truth. The reality is that peace is something that you have to be willing to fight and die for, is to ensure that the peace continues. Much like Lord Horatio Nelson said, one of the most famous admirals of the Royal Navy, he said, if you want peace, prepare for war. And that is really a truthful statement. For us to have peace inside of this region, we must be ready to destroy any forces in the area that oppose what our interests are. That's really the honest truth. It's not about we must stop anyone who is possibly going to conduct war. No. It is people who are conducting war or conducting hostile actions against our interests in the area that we need to be putting down. And that's why I think that at this point, peace is certainly not attainable. I believe that it is showing a very severe mental ineptitude currently by the U.S. government to constantly be trying to vie for peace when clearly the party we're trying to talk to does not want peace. So I would say that we need to go with the other option that we have, which is war. If we cannot have peace, then we will have war. And if we have war, we should be able to ensure that we win this war swiftly and we do not have to stay there for too long. So whatever options or whatever path we need to take beyond that point, we need to take a hardline approach and to start to secure the actual peace within this region through warlike measures, because that seems to be the only way that we are going to be able to actually get a peace that we're going to be happy with. Otherwise, we are going to give everything we can to Iran in appeasement, and they still will not be happy at the end of the day. And so with that, I hope that does...
Also, Enforcer, one other point as well. I saw an article coming out today. It looks like U.S. analysts are saying that it's very possible that by the end of this year, by the end of 2024, that Iran will declare themselves a nuclear power by then, with active nuclear weapons that are actually functional and able to be launched at our allies like Israel and things like that. So I'm beginning to wonder if that's actually the reason why Iran is stalling, because they know they're very close, if not already through or have achieved the nuclear breakthrough, and they're simply waiting on maybe finishing up the development of maybe a delivery system or something like that, or maybe they're hoping to receive one from Russia or a different country to be able to launch a nuke at their adversaries. That's a possibility as well that I was thinking that could be why they're actually stalling.
That could be why. It may be that they're stalling so that way they can have that nuclear weapon, so that way they'll have a shield. But that's why we need to act fast. We need to ensure that they do not get a weapon of mass destruction like that. That will be the worst thing that has happened in the Middle East in its entire history. And I know a lot of people are going to be saying, well, what about the invasion of Iraq in 2003? That pales in comparison to Iran getting an actual nuclear weapon. Hell, it's better to have a whole bunch of oops in the Middle East and invading countries that you believe are going to have a weapon of mass destruction instead of actually letting them get one. So I would say that this is going to end up being a large disaster from what I can tell with how this is going at the moment. And I feel like we should be taking a much more hardline approach, a much more firm approach in this area. Otherwise, things are going to continue to deteriorate and escalate until they're way out of hand. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. In all seriousness, not kidding around this time like I was at the beginning. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so with that, we're all out of polls to address. Excuse me. So let me end this one real quick and get rid of it off the screen. And now we're moving into our live chat segment. And tonight, there were no super chats. It's all live chats because tonight is only donations to the fundraiser. So, and also, by the way, I just realized we're up to 5,431 right now. So very good to see. But with that, we're jumping into our first live chat, which goes to Alan Schultz. He said, with regards to the Ukrainian soldiers shooting up the liquor store, does this act violate Article 33 of the Geneva Convention?
Article 33 of the Geneva Convention, of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Individual responsibility, collective penalties, pillage, and reprisals. No protected person may be punished for any offense he or she has not personally committed. Collective penalties and likewise all measures of intimidation or terrorism are prohibited. Pillage is prohibited. And so it appears that this is about pillage. But you see, they didn't pillage, necessarily. They destroyed property. The alcohol was the property of the store. So I would say it probably does not. But technically, you could probably find a way that is some sort of a violation of the rules of war, for sure. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion. Very interesting, very, very, very astute observation, though. But still, I hope that does address it fairly well. Huge shout out to User Error, who just threw in 100 to the fundraiser. Damn! And the fundraiser has now gotten up to $5,531 raised. Impressive stuff. And I hope we were able to answer that well. And we're on to the next one.
All right, and our next live chat question here is going to go to O-Tubes, who says, I've seen on another video earlier that Russia is giving land to China for them to help Russia more, and have you heard about that?
No, I have not heard of that. I would highly doubt that as well, because I would have to get more details on that, because if they're leasing land to them, we actually lease land to the Chinese in America, which is kind of an interesting fact, but beyond that, I have not heard about that at all. So I would largely have to not believe that at the moment until I had information to prove it otherwise. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least from what I know. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And this live chat goes to JMP Traveler, who says, does anyone know where the Wagner Group is, or did they get windowed?
I don't know where they are. They're supposed to be in Kursk, but we haven't heard about them since their arrival. So we don't know if there's some kind of a blocking force or something. Usually you hear a lot less about the blocking forces than the actual fighting forces. So they may be a blocking force, or they may still be, quote-unquote, staging in Kursk and not actually fighting at the moment. I'm not entirely sure. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least off of what I know right now about the Wagner Group. And with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and our next live chat question here goes to BK. It could be Burger King, but anyways, they said, "How does the threat of nuclear war impact the choices of NATO and Russia?" Honestly, BK, like the threat of nuclear war is the only thing that's really holding NATO back from actually attacking Russia, in my opinion. I personally think that if Russia did not have the nuclear shield, we would probably already have NATO forces going over to Russia. That's my own personal opinion. I think that Forster might disagree with that. But Putin said himself that the only thing Russia has to defend itself against the West is the nukes, because their army cannot go up against the combined forces of NATO. It's simply impossible because the Russian military is under-equipped, they're under-trained, and also they're not motivated. So I think that we'd probably be over there fighting right now if it weren't for the nukes. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I would have to say, in my opinion, I'd agree. Matthew, actually, I was the one who said that like, way back at the start of the chat. You're like, I don't think Enforcer would agree. I was like, no, that's what I've been saying for a long time. Because if it wasn't for nuclear weapons on either side, the conventional war that would have ended this whole thing would have been done and over with decades ago. That's the truth of the thing. Nuclear weapons are a defensive weapon. And I actually saw Adam McLean say they're not. They're offensive weapons. That's not necessarily true. Yes, a nuclear weapon is offensive in nature, in which you launch it at someone. It's not something that you shoot up into your skies to stop someone from hitting you. You don't do that. But the nuclear weapon, while being offensive in its actual usage, ends up being defensive in the kind of impact it has on how wars unfold. Neither side wants to nuke the other because they're scared that that side's going to nuke them. So in the end, the nuclear weapons end up being a shield, a deterrent from other countries attacking you with their nuclear weapons because they're scared of you firing yours back. So it ends up becoming a deterrent, which is sort of a defensive element more so than anything, although in the end it is used offensively. But as far as the nuclear weapons have played out in this situation, it's stopped both sides from directly confronting and fighting each other. And I would have to be honest, while this conventional war, if it ever did happen and we completely ruled out nuclear weapons, it would end up being a very bloody war for sure. It still would be a necessary war, one of the ones that would have to happen. And I feel like that is something that nuclear weapons have been a major detriment to in the world, is that you never see the kind of progress and change that wars brought about back in the day, because the major countries are never able to meet each other on an open battlefield and fight each other because of the threat of nuclear annihilation looming in the background. So the British cannot be touched, the French cannot be touched, we can't be touched, Russia can't be touched, China, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel largely cannot be touched by anyone without the threat of complete nuclear annihilation looming in the background of all of these countries that make a kind of a decision to attack one or the other. It has ended up freezing things around the world, because think about it, think about how much change we saw socially and culturally over the course of World War I and World War II, the deadliest wars to ever occur in human history, except for the War of Heavenly Ascension, I believe, which happened in the 1850s inside of China, which was a totally different thing. It was I think it is the second deadliest war in history behind World War II, if I'm correct. But well, actually, that's the Taiping Rebellion, I believe, is what that's called. But beyond that. Wait, no. I'm so sorry, everyone. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. It's the Boxer. No. Oh my god. Hang on. It's
the Boxer Rebellion. Man, Mike Tyson come out. He's fighting me.
Let's see here. So it's the Taiping Rebellion. It is the Taiping Rebellion. Why in the world was I questioning myself on that? I don't know. It is the Taiping Rebellion.
Trust yourself, Enforcer. Trust your instincts.
I gotta trust them, man. I gotta use the Force sometimes. But beyond that, World War I and World War II, while being some of the deadliest wars in history, we ended up bringing out about the most change. We saw dictatorships rise and then immediately fall. In the modern world, if a dictatorship arises in a country like Russia or China, which they have, there's nothing that can be done to defeat that dictatorship because they have nuclear weapons protecting them from us conducting any large action to change something about them and improve the situation over there. And that is something that I would have to say has been a major detriment to the world since the end of World War II and throughout the entirety of the Cold War in the present day, is that nuclear weapons have put a complete stop on any kind of actual meaningful wars happen that would change the world entirely over the course of that one war. We don't see wars like that anymore, and I think that to be entirely honest, is a massive disadvantage that the world is living with right now. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, well, yeah, but, like, isn't it better, that the nuclear weapons are there so that way a lot of people don't die? Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can look at it that way. But at the same time, it's like a lot of people, billions of people, are having to live under oppressive dictatorships simply for the fact that there is no way to actually overthrow them, because if we tried to, everyone would get nuked and there would be a nuclear holocaust across the entire world. And that's kind of the issue that I see. Honestly, I think that's an issue as well with the United States and Britain and France. We have nuclear weapons, and then no one feels that apt to attack us directly, where you could just go into a full-blown conventional war with someone and then not have to worry about the repercussions. Because you also have to think about this. We can't even really deal with countries like Iran directly, like where we'll go, okay, we'll invade them. Because if the Russians really felt strongly about that for some reason, we could start to deal with the threat that they may start dropping nuclear weapons on U.S. forces inside of Iran. And then a nuclear war will begin because of that anyways. Even if it isn't a war in between two nuclear powers, it could turn into one. And then that starts to really curtail what we can do around the world as well. If it was without nuclear weapons, we could go, we're invading Iran. Russia goes, I don't like that. We go, what are you going to do about it? And then it starts a large conventional war that we would end up winning. And so that's generally how I look at it. I'm not really a big fan of nuclear weapons, and that's how it plays into the Ukraine war as well. Or really the conflict in between Russia and NATO is that neither side wants to commit to a full-blown war because it will end in a nuclear exchange. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so moving on here to our next live chat. This one goes to Emily, excuse me, Emily. But anyways, Emily said, how come Russians don't booby trap the equipment that they leave behind?
They don't have the time. Usually when they're abandoning equipment, they're in a great rush, and so they're never really thinking, how do I trap this tank where it'll blow up if they started or anything like that. They generally just get out and run immediately. They don't really have a lot of time to do anything rather than pick up maybe some sidearms and then go running for the hills. And so I hope that does address that fairly well. And let's see here. Let's see. I'm seeing someone. 50 bags. So World War I was over political leaders that had an argument. Not really. A lot of people simplify World War I to where it sounds like it doesn't make any sense at all. World War I makes a lot of sense when you look at it from a real historical perspective. You have the let me go down this rabbit hole really quickly, because I really don't like it when people say World War I had no reason at all and it was just a senseless slaughter. It was not a senseless slaughter. There was a method to the madness there. And so let me try and explain it a little bit. So before World War I, to give a little bit of a prologue to this, you had the United Kingdom, France, and Russia that created the Triple Entente, which was a group of powers that were trying to ensure that there was a balance in Europe. Now, this balance existed because of a thing called the Congress of Vienna in 1815, which is where all of the major European powers agreed that no matter what would happen in Europe, every single one of them would work to maintain a balance of power on the continent. So that way one country wouldn't be overpowering everyone else. Everyone would be able to offset the other equally in some way, shape, or form. And that's what defined the entire European continent for a century, was the Congress of Vienna. And that's why the British, French, and the Russians made the Triple Entente before World War I, was to create a balance in between the Triple Alliance, which was an alliance made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. This alliance of three major powers inside of Europe was meant to offset the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. However, while they were trying to maintain the balance of power in Europe, Austria-Hungary, which made up all of these countries you see today, including Romania, parts of Ukraine, the entirety of the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Austria-Hungary, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, and Montenegro, as well as, I believe, a little bit of Albania. But beyond that, the Ottoman Empire controlled the rest of this. Anyways, there was a little country right here called Serbia, and much like everything starts off, the Serbians wanted to reclaim all of the land that was considered to be Serb. And that is really what we see in the modern day. This is what a lot of the Serbian people consider to be Serb land. It also includes Kosovo as well, but that's a whole other thing for a whole other time. Beyond that, the Serbs wanted the land back. And so they ended up creating this group called the Black Hand, which was a an organization that tried to conduct a reign of terror within southern Austria-Hungary, which was a multicultural empire that they would hope would cause enough terror and enough problems that the weakened Austro-Hungarian government would just relent and give up the land to the Serbs. So this right here in the Balkans, this is generally the flashpoint and the entire reason for the war. You end up losing this in the weeds when we talk about all the major powers that got involved later and how that war went, but this is where it all started, was in the Balkans, and it was over the nationalist claims that the Serbs had over what would be called maybe ancient Serb lands, if you want to call it that. I also want to point this out really quickly. Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire by this point were weakening empires on the way out. Austria-Hungary was a multicultural empire made up of multiple different ethnic groups and many different cultural groups as well. This causes a lot of problems within most countries to have such a different breakup of cultures, especially at this time, because there is no common national identity that creates a strong national core. This is actually a really big problem, and that's why you'll see that a lot of countries during this time started to nationalize, and so instead of people looking at themselves as Parisians or maybe people of Toulouse, they started to look at themselves as French, not from their locality, which was a big thing at the time. It was trying to create a national identity so that way there was a strong national base and the nation would be strong at its core, at least culturally. People wouldn't look at themselves as these smaller groups, they would look at themselves as French people. Much like in the modern day, Americans view themselves as Americans instead of Alabamians, like Matthew and me would call ourselves. We consider ourselves more so Americans than Alabamians. But nevertheless, this ended up posing a really big issue in Austria-Hungary because the kind of nationalism that was being brought forward in most Western European countries could never be brought forward in Austria-Hungary because of the massive cultural differences within Austria-Hungary. I mean, literally everywhere you went, people were using a completely different language and had a completely different culture. And that poses huge issues for control. And so the Serbs knew that they could take advantage of this. They were going out, and because of nationalism was actually working against Austria-Hungary at the time. Unlike other countries where the Germans could go, hey, look, you might be from Hesse-Kassel, and you might be from Brandenburg, but together we're all Germans, and we all share a common cultural background. In Austria-Hungary, people were going, screw the Hungarian Empire. I'm a Hungarian. I'm not an Austro-Hungarian. I'm a Hungarian. I speak Hungarian. My culture is Hungarian. So screw the Austro-Hungarians. I want out. I want to be Hungary. And so the Serbs knew that this was the prevailing mindset in Austria-Hungary, and they could take advantage of that, and the weakened empire would relent, and they would probably give up the land to the Serbs. So then, in 1914, in Sarajevo, Gavrilo Princip, who was a member of the Black Hand, ended up killing the, I believe the Crown Prince was his actual title at the time, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife within the town of Sarajevo. And this was a part of the attempt by the Black Hand to make the Austro-Hungarian government relent and give up the land to the Serbs. This had the opposite effect. This pissed off the Austro-Hungarians so much they decided to declare a war on Serbia, but Serbia had an alliance with Russia. And Russia had historically always been an ally of the Serbs, and so they joined the war in support of the Serbs against Austria-Hungary. So at this point, World War I is largely a Balkans war. It's in between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, but then there's the outside power of Russia that ends up joining. But because of this, and because of the Russians joining in, because everyone still believes in this concept of the balance of power in Europe because of the Congress of Vienna, Germany then joins the war against Russia and Serbia in support of Austria-Hungary to make sure that there's a more so even balance in between the two sides of the conflict. Because of that, because of the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians now going to war with Serbia and Russia, now the French then declare war on the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians in support of the Russians and the Serbs. Because of that, the Germans then decide that they cannot fight a two-front war against Serbia, Russia, and France, and so then they decide that they're going to do something that is pretty unorthodox, which is that they're going to conduct what's called the Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan was a plan that had been war-gamed out a little bit before the war, and it was a plan that had been come up with by Field Marshal Schlieffen, and the idea was that instead of invading France through the area of Alsace-Lorraine, which would be the most likely route of advance. They would instead punch through the Netherlands and Belgium and then come through this area of France, which is largely undefended. And so that's what they did. And up until this point, Britain actually was not going to join the war. It looked like they were getting close, but they actually really had no intention of doing so. But because the Germans were invading Belgium, Britain actually had a defensive pact with Belgium, saying that if anyone invaded them, they would come and join the war for Belgium in their defense against whoever was invading them. And so because the Germans invaded Belgium, then Britain joined the war in support of Belgium against Germany. And so then that's how World War I actually began. It actually had a reason to it. It wasn't just like a whole bunch of people had a disagreement and there was a senseless slaughter. It, of course, came down to territory disputes in the Balkans, and then it exploded into this massive continent-spanning war that really got out of hand when you think about it, but at the same time, you can see where the origin came from. Which is something that a lot of people always get confused. Everyone always looks at the war in between the major powers in Western Europe and go, wow, that makes no sense. But if you actually trace it from its very flashpoint inside of Serbia, and really inside of Sarajevo, you really get to see where this comes from, where the entire First World War came from. And then there was also a lot of other tensions that were going on that really did make the First World War so easy to kick off. Germany actually controlled Alsace-Lorraine at the time. This little pointy area in France actually wasn't pointy, it was actually sloped. Germany controlled that area, and they had taken that from France back in the Franco-Prussian War of 1879. This pissed off the French greatly. And so from 1879 onwards, the French had this massive hatred for the Germans and were looking really for any excuse to try and get Alsace-Lorraine back. And World War I was the perfect moment to declare war on Germany in defense of Russia and Serbia to try and reclaim Alsace-Lorraine. So then you can kind of also see why it kicked off in Western Europe as well, and why France would join, and then why Germany would invade through Belgium, and then why Britain joined the war in the defense of Belgium. It was all for these reasons. So very complicated kind of a web of how everyone joined the war and why, but still, it had a purpose. It had a reason. I don't like it when people say that wars are senseless and without purpose. Every war has a purpose. Every war has a reason. Some of those reasons are maybe a little bit weaker than others, but no one enters a war just for the hell of it. Everyone has to have a point for it. And so with that, I hope that does address it incredibly well, at least the best I can, because World War I is like one of my major points of study, and so I know that there was a purpose to that war. And then by the end, but the stupid thing is that nihilism started to become really popular by the end of World War I because of the industrialized scale of warfare. Like, we're used to industrial warfare nowadays. Like, the war in Ukraine is a purely industrial war. And people don't really find that shocking anymore to see that kind of a conflict. But for World War I, that was brand new, to see a front line span hundreds of miles, actively manned along its entire length, and massive battles consuming hundreds of thousands of men. That was brand new. That was never seen before in history up till this point on this kind of scale. So a lot of people were shocked by this and blown away, and they thought that it was absolute barbarism, and people weren't these high and mighty folks like they thought they were during the Victorian and Edwardian periods. They were actually just savage animals underneath. And so a lot of people became nihilists, and this is really what created the modernist era, is that people started to say, well, what are we really? Because we're not these cultured people, we're just animals. So then you could get all this abstract art and shit because people went bonkers for a little bit. But then everyone finally found out what our purpose is, really through World War II and afterwards. And then World War II wasn't that much of a shock, although it was far more deadlier than World War II. People had gotten an idea of what an industrialized war was going to look like. So with that, I hope it does address that well. Like, there's so much to talk about with World War I. It really is the catalyst for where we are now in the modern world. You can literally take everything else in history and throw it to the waste bin if you wanted to really understand modern history. You start at World War I and you work your way forward, literally everywhere around the world. Start at 1914, work your way onwards from there, and it all makes sense beyond that point. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, so moving on to our next question here, we have one from Hokey Redneck, and they said, what do you and Andrew think of Russia's nukes? They need a heavy water tritium every 3 years to work, and tritium costs $30,000 per gram, and I don't think any of Russia's nukes will go.
I think that they probably will. Well, a lot of them will not be operational because the Russians certainly don't have the funding or the budget to be able to maintain a large nuclear arsenal like the one they have on paper. So I'm assuming that probably only 30% or less of that arsenal is operational, meaning that they really have less operational nukes than the United States has. And I know America has enough funding to keep every single one of our nuclear weapons operational. I mean, hell, we spend $900 billion a year. We have to have operational nuclear weapons at that cost. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to, let's see here. This one's going to go to Epic Trains Canada, who says exactly how close is the Ukrainian army to Kursk, and how likely is it that they'll take the city?
The Ukrainian army isn't really that close to Kursk. It's about 20 miles away right now. It's somewhere around Lyubomovka from what we assume. So they're not that far, and I don't think they're going to be taking it anytime soon because it still looks like advances on the Lyubomovka front or the Lyubomovka direction on the R200 are going slowly, and it looks like while the 810th did break yesterday, there is still some active resistance going on there that is slowing in advance. So I don't think that'll be happening anytime soon. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And also really quickly, I saw some people in the chat, and I'm seeing this a lot. A lot of people are saying, actually, I think you could start off measuring the modern history from the Napoleonic Wars forward. So like 1799 or 1798 and onwards. Really, to be honest, like I say throw everything out the window and start with World War I, because that 100 years forward to now is really where everything started. But to be entirely honest, to understand everything about why we're here today, the way we are in every country around the world, and why things exist the way they are, you really have to know all of history. Like, you have to start at literally the very beginning, because everyone will say, oh, you know, like World War I's a great starting point. That's what I say, because it's a very easy thing to say. But then if you really think about it, World War I wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the Congress of Vienna, the Franco-Prussian Wars, the wars in between the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire. There was a million wars in the 19th century that created the perfect storm for World War I to happen. And so understanding every facet of the 19th century is important to understanding why World War I would happen, and then World War I is really the beginning of why everything else happened in the modern day over the next 100 years from that point. But then everything happened in the 1800s. Like, for example, the rise of Napoleon happened because of Louis XVI and his extremely exorbitant spending on military ventures like the 7 Years' War, then supporting the American Revolution in the colonies, and then also the massive economic downturn, droughts, and famine that then ensued right afterwards, and the French government did not have enough money to import food from outside the country. If it wasn't for that perfect storm that was created at that point, Napoleon never would have risen to create the kind of conditions that we saw in France, or really the revolution would have never come around if it wasn't for the American Revolution being successful in showing that Enlightenment ideals could work and could end up overthrowing a government or a nation and then forming a new one off of Enlightenment principles. But then Enlightenment principles would have never existed if it wasn't for the Renaissance and a whole bunch of people starting to try and think in revolutionary ways. Well, that was more so like an abstract intelligentsia kind of a thing. It wasn't something that affected the common people, the Renaissance, but it did start to bring forward the ideas of the Enlightenment, and it was like its infantile states at the beginning of the Renaissance. But the Renaissance would have never happened either if it wasn't for the meshing of European states together along with the Ottomans, and also the collapse of Constantinople by the Ottomans back in 1444 that brought forward this great idea of the Romans and the Greek republics being these incredible kinds of governments and institutions that should be followed as examples. If it wasn't for the fall of Constantinople, that kind of a light bulb wouldn't have been lit in people's heads to spur this idea that maybe there was something to be learned from the Roman republics and the Greeks. Because up until that point, the Romans and the Greeks were looked at as pagan savages up until that point in history. And like, you can go all the way back through history like that, pretty much to the start, to the cradle of civilization inside of the ancient civilizations like ancient Babylonia, and then the rise of the Egyptian kingdoms, and then finally from there, the infantile Roman Republic, or the Roman Kingdom, and then the Republic, and also the Greek city-states as well, and all that. Like, you can literally go all the way back to the beginning of history, and then work your way forward, and if you do that, you have a really, really good level and understanding of a lot that makes the world tick today, because things that happened 2,000 years ago have no real-life impact, but it does kind of explain why cultures work the way they work nowadays and why things kind of morphed into what they are, but not a lot. But it's still good to know. But with that, I hope that does kind of go through that incredibly well. I love talking about history. Everyone knows that. So if y'all give me an excuse to do it, I'm going to do it. I know Matthew's probably falling asleep over there right now. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so this one right here is going to go to Claire, who says, I'll ask a question following up from the previous stream. How has the Western command theory changed the Ukrainians' approach to field-grade command?
It has changed it a little bit. We've seen that as far as the strategies used, it seems as though the Ukrainians still kind of favor Soviet models of strategy, but they do implement a Western style battle order to their units. So instead of it being based off of, say, the core level, not really the like. Let me think. Instead of it being based off of the regimental level, which is usually like the basic form of structure for a Soviet unit, they have started to relegate it down to the battalion level as their basic unit structure instead of the regiment. That has been a very big change that was made during the reforms brought forward by Petro Poroshenko back before Zelensky became president, because most of the Ukrainian army reforms happened under Poroshenko. Another thing that's been changed greatly is the chain of command and how it works. And not only that, the change from a mostly conscript force to a solely contract force. That's been really one of the biggest changes brought forward by the Western model that the Ukrainians have started to use. And those would be some of the biggest and most broad examples that I can make at the moment about how that works. Now, the United States has tried to school the Ukrainians a little bit through the war on how Western strategies and stratagems would work on the battlefield and how to implement them. But we saw that the Ukrainians ran into a little bit of a bump in the road implementing that in the summer offensive of 2023, and then pretty much completely abandoned any kind of American doctrinal teachings from that point forward in their offensive doctrine and their defensive doctrine as well. So I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next question here goes to, let's see, Ron Burrell Jr. He said, do we know how many Russians have been captured so far in the offensive?
About 2,500 of them from our last count. We haven't gotten an updated count yet. That counts from yesterday, but we believe it's about 2,500. So just about shy of a whole brigade has been captured. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Also, I'm seeing I saw Miller Pebble say, the truth is the Greeks and Romans were just far more intelligent than what we produce these days. I'd actually argue the opposite. A lot of Romans were actually fairly stupid. Like, a lot of people, like, whenever people look back into the past, we only really see the cherry-picked examples of the best. Not a lot of people see the worst of society back then, but there was a lot of bad elements in society in Rome. Like, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but adults having very inappropriate relations with people who may not be so old, if that's a good way to put it, was incredibly common in the Roman Empire. Not as like a form of, like, I'm trying to figure out how to say this in like the most PG way possible. Not as a form of like self-gratification, but as a display of power over someone else. Like, things like that happened a lot back then. Like, if you ever really look at the ancient Roman Republic and the Empire and how people actually lived back in the day, I think a lot of people, if they really knew like the basic elements of how Roman society and Roman culture function, a lot of people would be absolutely appalled by the reality of what Roman life really looked like. It wasn't a compassionate kind of a culture or a society from what we know. It was a very kind of a power-oriented society on every single level. People were more than willing to screw each other over if it meant that they could gain more power for themselves or exert power over someone else. On top of that, a lot of the Roman philosophers that all of y'all would know today, or some of the cherry-picked examples of some of the Roman greats, like Scipio Scipio the Younger, or for that example, Octavian, or anything like that. Like, those were some of the few examples of like good Roman people. Like, there are a decent amount of texts and writings of the time from slaves who talked about poor treatment. It is insane. When I say poor treatment, it makes some of the treatment that came in modern times during like the very end of common form slavery around the world look tame compared to what was happening in the Roman Empire. I mean, it was it wasn't really that great of a time. I would say, to be honest, the modern world, with all of its flaws and bad features that it has, is probably the best time to live in, technologically, culturally, and socially. Because if y'all went back and y'all actually really read, because I don't read a lot about like how the Roman Empire rose and fell in their armies that much, to be entirely honest, but I did read and learn a lot about how Roman culture and society worked, and it was freaking wild. It was pretty bad. I was like, dang, these people, by modern definition, would be called savages, and they largely were. But there was a lot of like intellectual components that were positive that came out of the Roman Republic and the Greek city-states. But at the same time, some of their basic social functions or like rituals, or if you want to call it that they would conduct on their daily lives, like we do nowadays, completely different. And a lot of people would consider, honestly, by statute, a lot of it would be considered criminal these days. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion, at least from what I know and what I've read. But I don't really look up to the Roman Empire and their people that much. I think the United States is not the successor to the Roman Republic. I think we're better than the Roman Republic by a long shot. And so with that, I hope that does address that incredibly well, at least in my opinion. With that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
All right, and real quick, I put up an interesting poll question here. The question is, what is the core motivation for wars to start from these options? And we're talking about in the modern day. 68% said greed, conquest, etc., while 17% said sadistic people and psychopaths, and 11% said defensive/perceived threats, and 4% said restless populations. And honestly, from these options, I'd have to say in the modern day, I would believe that most of the time it is greed, conquest, etc. The exception I would say here on one thing is probably the Ukraine war. I still really can't figure out why Putin really did that. Putin claims that he was threatened by NATO, so he claims he's acting in defense. But I would say that going in and invading Ukraine is not going to protect them from NATO whatsoever. And also, NATO is purely defensive. It's not offensive. They're not in the business of attacking people, and they've never done that. So that whole argument doesn't really hold up. So I'd have to assume that maybe Putin has some personal grudge or grievance with Ukraine for maybe something involving his past. But that's just a guess, because really the invasion of Ukraine makes no sense, and it really just put Russia in a really tight spot with their economy. So, Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'd agree with the large majority. I would say it's greed and conquest. And I know a lot of people, like 17%, are saying it's sadism of some sort. I would disagree with that, actually. And I know a lot of people are probably going to say, well, what about Hitler? Hitler actually had, like, this objective. He actually had a greed/conquest mindset to what they did in World War II. It wasn't this kind of, like, sadism. Like, there was a lot of sadism involved in that, of course. Like, no one can deny that. But the actual underlying principles of the expansion wars that were conducted by Germany during World War II was from a greed and conquest point. I'm not going to explain all of it, but they were trying to work off of an autarky economic principle, which means that Germany was going to be completely self-sustaining and have a large amount of Lebensraum, which is the German word for living room, for the German people in the future. And so it required them to invade Eastern Europe, take over all of these lands, destroy the Soviet Union, and pretty much work everyone out here to death as slaves, growing food for the Germans. And in the future, the Germans could move into this now completely empty landscape, because they would slowly, by Hitler's mindset, kill off all of the Eastern Europeans. The Germans could just slowly populate this area over time and replace the Eastern Europeans that originally lived there. That was the actual principle. So you're looking more so at a greed and conquest kind of a mindset there once again. And that's really what all the wars are fought over. It's fought over land, it's fought over money, economics, resources. It is generally greed based. If you want to boil it down to its principle of its vice, it's mostly greed. Very, very, very few wars are truly fought over religion. And I know a lot of people are going to be saying that that's the next one. I strongly disagree. Religion was generally an overture for more so greed or conquest minded approaches. Like, for example, with like Islam, like early Islam, most of their wars were not really meant to expand the reach of Islam throughout North Africa or the Middle East. It was more so to expand the power that Islamic sultans would have over these areas, kind of like how the Ottoman Empire would do later, kind of like how some Christian countries did throughout Europe, especially in the time where the Roman Catholic Church split into the Protestant nations of Northern Europe and the Catholic nations of Southern Europe, you would see a lot of wars start under a quote-unquote premise of religious differences, but underlying that, the main reason was some sort of a need for conquest or a gain of resources of a sort. And so with that,
I will say, though, I think it does vary drastically. We're talking about in generalities here, which is really sort of, honestly, a little bit unfair because every war has a different motivation for starting. But, for example, on restless populations, only 4% said that's what starts wars. In that case, I would say that's pretty uncommon of an option. But an example of that would probably be North Korea. One of the main reasons that North Korea keeps lashing out against like the South and places like that is because the entire regime is based on hatred of the South. And the whole regime basically is propped up by that hatred. And if it were to suddenly disappear, then that might mess up the entire governance system inside of North Korea. That also might cause Kim to get ousted by the sharks that are literally circling around him every single day. And believe it or not, he is in danger every single day by the people around him to get overthrown if he is perceived to be weak. So that is a pretty limited option right there. Also, the 17% that said psychopaths, I think, in every leader around the world, there's honestly some psychopathic like tendencies or qualities to pretty much every leader around the world. That seems to be like a common thread in my opinion. Some are worse than others. Like obviously Putin is a complete psychopath, and there's other psychopaths pretty much everywhere around the world, but it comes in degrees. But I would say that is probably a pretty good one right there. I would agree with the 17%. But I'm, like I said, with the enforcer, I think it is greed and conquest is the main reason why it starts. People want other people's stuff. And also, war is a business. War is very profitable, and people love to make profits. It benefits not only the people in power, but also the complexes that create the equipment and also the weaponry as well. So, very interesting to see the results.
I would agree. And also, I'm seeing a lot of people saying, let's see, a lot of different stuff. I'm seeing a lot of interesting statements, and I'm trying to see if maybe we can, maybe I can touch on one of them. Let's see here. Sociopaths. Everyone's kind of a psychopath. Everyone's talking about psychopaths and sociopaths. And FBI said, real reason for war is always resources, money. It generally is. Like, here's the thing. Like, even with Iran fighting Israel, the reason why Iran is doing that is because they're wanting to destroy the Israelis, which are occupying what the Iranians would call Holy Land. But the war is not religious. Like I want to make that clear. It looks religious, but it isn't really. Let me tell you all what's actually boiling under the surface on this conflict. If Iran actually did win against Israel, destroyed Israel, and ended up conducting most likely a second Holocaust against the Jewish people living in Israel, really the Israelis in general, whether they're Jewish or not, Iran would be able to cement themselves in their mind as a leader of the Islamic world. And then all of the Islamic nations of the Middle East would start to look for Iran for guidance and would start to align with them because they're showing that they're a strong nation that can get things done within the Islamic world's interests, a combined interest. And this would start to draw Iran a lot of economic power because all of these countries would start trading and conducting business with Iran instead of with other countries like the United States outside the sphere. It's not a religious fight. It is a fight that is for resources and power, but it's disguised with religious ideology. That's almost what every single war looks like. It's the same with any war. Like, you can even talk about the Crusades. The Crusades and every single jihad ever conducted was an attempt to use religion as an excuse to gain more power and more economic prosperity for a specific group. But religion was used as the general overture to bridge that so that way it wasn't so harsh sounding. Like, we want more money and we want more resources, so we're going to war. Instead of saying that, we say these people are evil because they believe something different than us, and that's why we're going to war. But the underlying reasons are always the same. It's always for some sort of a gain of resources, money, or land, which land is a resource in and of itself. And so with that,
also here, I see Miller Pebble brought up a question about North Korea. They said, will his sister, meaning Kim Jong-un's sister, take over North Korea, do you feel? I think eventually she might. If something happens to Kim Jong-un, she is clearly being groomed to be the next leader of North Korea, which is kind of odd because that was not the person I was expecting personally to try to take over. But it's not going to be a hostile takeover by any means. It will be a, I guess, quote unquote, peaceful transfer of power to the sister if something did happen to Kim Jong-un. So she is the next up in line, in my opinion, to take over that country. But it won't be hostile. But there are other factions inside of North Korea that would love to actually take over the country. It's probably not anytime soon that's going to happen, but it is a possibility in the future.
And that is an interesting take. Also, I hate to literally bounce right back to what I was talking about, but I see some people saying some more interesting stuff. And let's see here. And also, Vito Lucena said something that made me really think for a moment to explain this. A religious motive sought to seek nationalist ideology. Now, that is something interesting as well, because nowadays in the modern world, since World War I, we start to see the rise of governments that clearly do not justify things with religious purpose. Really, secularism has become the name of the game. No one really uses religion to justify anything anymore. So what do they use now? Let's look at the Soviet Union. This is probably the best example. The sacred fate of the motherland. Now it sounds religious in a sense because they're trying to make it sound sacred and such, but you have to find some sort of a thing, a nation does, to differentiate one from the other and to be able to justify some sort of a war against another group. Like the sacred virtues of communism, of Marxism. It is something to die for, to bring the goodness to people around the world. It sounds a lot to me like communism, as far as what they say, at least the Soviet Union did, to justify wars of expansion, especially at the end of the Russian Civil War, is very similar to what you would have heard a pope say around the 12th century to justify a crusade. We have to bring the virtues of Christendom and free the Holy Land for all of those Christians living in the area of Israel and the Levant today. So let's go down there and let's clear out the place from these evil heathens. It's literally the same thing that the communists say. They sit there and say, the virtues of communism are great and bold. We must begin wars into Eastern Europe to expand our power, to relieve all of these poor innocent people from the capitalist heathens that control them right now. It's literally the same kind of justifications. It's just changing the wordage around so that way it seems more acceptable than saying we need more money and resources, therefore we're going to go to war and kill these other people and conquer them so that way we can have it. That's largely the best way that I can put it out there right now. But anyways, with that, we are
I agree. Also real quick, Enforcer, I see some people balking at the idea of a female North Korean leader. The people are wondering, is that even possible in North Korea? Because that society is very traditional and based and rooted in basically long-standing tradition. So is it possible to have a female North Korean leader? I personally think it is possible because, believe it or not, Kim Jong-un is actually considered a progressive in North Korea, for whatever that means in North Korea. He is considered forward-thinking compared to his predecessors like Kim Jong-il and also Kim Il-sung. So he's actually forward-thinking. So in my opinion, I think it's very possible that the sister of Kim Jong-un could take power after something happens to him. Of course, that could be uprooted if a lot of people don't like that in the government. That could sort of be overthrown after Un passes away. But Enforcer, what do you think? Do you think there could be like the sister taking charge, or probably not?
Absolutely. She's a Kim. She has to take charge. Like, the entire nation of North Korea is built around the Songbun system, which is entirely based on your loyalty to the Kims. So it doesn't matter whether she's a man or a woman. It just matters if you love the Kim family and you are devoted to the Kim family entirely. So it doesn't matter if she's a woman. If Kim Jong-un died, she would be the next in line. There would be no ifs, ands, or buts in Korea at all, because their entire social system is built on loving the Kims. Not loving a man, just loving the Kim family in general.
Indeed, I would have to agree with that. And also, I see a lot of people laughing at the fact that I'm calling Kim Jong-un progressive. He's not progressive by Western means, like no doubt about that. Kim Jong-un is a hardcore dictator, one of the most brutal dictators in the planet. But he is progressive in the hermit kingdom of North Korea, like oddly enough. He's considered that way. Like he's pushing the boundaries of Juche and all their ideologies. So he is progressive, so he might actually put his sister in charge. But anyways, we're rabbit holing like crazy on North Korea. So we're going to move on from... We're going to move on to our, second to last question, which goes to Quantum Fighter, who says, do you think the West should train more AFU men, and what units forces are most needed to train, and are NATO still training pilots? and maybe the Ukrainians don't know how to integrate the F-16s.
Very interesting points, Quantum Fighter. I would think that the West should be training more Ukrainians. We should be constantly keeping a flow of Ukrainians going through training on all weapon systems, not just the Ukrainian Air Force and F-16s and their ground support and such things. I would also say, let's see, and what forces are most needed to train? I would really say all of them as a blend, like not really prioritizing one or the other. We should constantly be focusing on introducing Western-trained infantry, Western-trained air defense, Western-trained ground support crews, Western-trained pilots, and slowly but surely graft a Western model and a Western mindset into the armed forces of Ukraine. I think that's something that we just need to work on every level and every facet of their armed forces to make sure that it all gets westernized about the same speed. Let's see, are NATO still training pilots? From what I know, yes. I don't know how many of them, but there are still some that are in training over here. I just don't know how much of them. And maybe the Ukrainians don't know how to integrate the F-16s. Maybe. But the F-16s don't really have to be integrated all too much. They could truly, if they wanted to just get them out there, they could work them off of a Soviet pattern of air war doctrine. They don't have to implement a Western air war doctrine for them yet. It's just that the weapons and capabilities of the F-16 are Western, but the way they use it could be Soviet style. Kind of like how they use our ground forces equipment. Like, we give them Abrams, we give them Strikers, and they still end up using it on a Soviet grand strategy model. And it still kind of works. Like, it works. It's just that the abilities of that equipment aren't fleshed out entirely. So that's, I hope, my best answer I can make for that right now. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is going to be Vitaly, who said, how many days until Glushkovo and the rest of the south of the Sen is under Ukrainian control, you think? And I would wager a week for this operation to resolve.
I would say maybe 2 weeks. They're actually moving a little bit slowly. It looks like they're moving very cautiously through the area, probably trying to make sure that their losses are almost non-existent in their advance through this area, so that way it doesn't end up draining manpower for something that, in the Ukrainian mind, they're probably already going to control, whether they lose a lot of men taking this area quickly, or whether they cautiously and slowly move through the area and take it that way. So I think that it may be about 2 weeks, or a little bit longer than that, because they are moving at a far slower pace than I was expecting about 2 days ago, because they've only taken Vishnevka and Apanonsovka outside of Snegost, and this is the second day from the Glushkovo bridge being destroyed. So while moving at a good pace, it's still moving fairly slow, at least in my opinion, for it to be the next week. It's probably going to be the next 2 weeks, most likely. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I've got to give a massive shout out to all of the folks who have watched this channel tonight. At the peak, there were 13.5 thousand people here, and 90,000 people have watched this stream before it ended. I've got to give a huge thanks to each and every single one of y'all. If y'all have enjoyed and you're new to this channel, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Link in the description below. Usually we don't plug that. I don't know why in the world I plugged that. I felt like I was doing a video outro there. But beyond that, huge shout out to everyone once again for raising $5,601 on the fundraiser. That is absolutely incredible. Unbelievable, as a matter of fact. That is a huge amount, and I gotta thank y'all all once again for supporting that nonprofit and helping them to continue to do the humanitarian work they do in Ukraine to hopefully free up the Ukrainian government's efforts and let them focus more on the war effort than the humanitarian side of things. Huge thanks to all of y'all once again for watching. We will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. Good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And with that, once again, thank you all for another fantastic fundraiser stream with over $5,600 raised. It is tremendous to see and almost double the goal. So huge shout out to the LSA for that. And we'll also see you on Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern on the next Nightly War News stream, and maybe midday tomorrow as well if there's enough news to cover. But with that, we'll see you all then. And of course, Slava Ukraine, Herom Slava. We'll see you all later, and also good night.
The Leaf Spring Army sends